Hello, everybody. Welcome to a amazing collaboration between me, Kara Burrell, and the one and only Radio Free Mormon. How you doing,
Hi,
dude?
Kara. How are you doing?
I'm so good. This is our first probably real collab, just you and me.
It is here on a Saturday morning while all the world's asleep.
I rolled out of bed, chipper and excited to take on this speech from Steve Densley. So you are a lawyer by trade, right? So I
Or
thought it'd be fun,
profession.
trade profession. You probably went to school. I don't know. I didn't. So I thought it'd be fun to have like attorney against attorney.
Right,
Ex-Mormon
Steve
versus
Densley.
Mormon.
Now, you found out about this talk. This talk was given by Steve Densley, who's a big wig with FAIR and Interpreter and all these apologetic organizations. He's an attorney of some repute, at least according to the introduction that was given him by Scott Gordon before he gave this talk at the 2023 FAIR conference. And apparently, this is such a big gig that Steve Densley took the same talk and at a minimum has repeated it in Texas, January 20th, 2024 in Houston. I don't know if he's repeated it anywhere else, but before it gets any more legs, you thought it would be a good idea to talk about this address and see if there's any problems with it.
See if there's any problems with somebody saying, how do we prove the church true? I'm going to be interested in that kind of thing. So when he was giving that speech, I went around the internet and I was like, where can I find this? I want to see what he has to say. I'm interested if somebody is in the apologetic sphere, they're a lawyer, and they say, this is how we prove the church true. I'm very interested in that. And I was lucky enough to go do some digging into the far reaches of the FAIR LDS website to finally screen record. It was kind of hard to get my hands on this, but we have a bunch of clips that we're going to go through and see what he has to say.
I know we've been going at this for months as far as scheduling goes, and
Yeah.
you've been trying to get the clips, and it's been difficult, so I couldn't see the clips, which makes it hard to comment on the talk. And ironically, you may have noticed this already, but 2 weeks ago, Fair Mormon put it up on their YouTube channel. So
I
you can
did.
actually access this talk on YouTube now.
Yeah, it was so difficult to get, and then they just gave it to us. So,
So thank you, Fair Mormon.
Thank you. Right, but if you want to see, RFM, an actual attorney, go against this guy's talk, you're in the right place. So welcome everyone to this live stream. Right now we're on the Nuancehoe YouTube channel. So any super chats or questions or comments you guys want to leave, that helps out the channel a lot. And then we'll also be reposting this to RFM, to your channel, right? Mormon
Yes,
Discussions.
it is in all senses of the word a collaboration. Thank you.
Yeah, so excited. All right. Any other things we want to talk about?
Sure. This is an hour-long talk. It's given by Stephen Densley, and we've given the history of it. Since you got it to me and I saw it was on YouTube, I listened to the whole thing. I made 9 pages of notes. And then
I laughed so hard. I was like,
yes. And then we're talking about timestamps, and I went crazy. And I did 35 timestamps, which is way too many. It's way too many. But this is a convoluted talk. And I've got to probably talk a little bit about what the heck he's saying, because by listening to the talk, you're not going to understand what he's saying. All right. Not unless you're Steve Densley. There are times when people give talks. When I give a talk in such a way that I've got a message, right? There's something I want to communicate to the audience. And I try and design my talk in such a way as to communicate that message. Now, either Steve Densley is a really bad communicator because, or something else, because either intentionally or unintentionally, he is trying to give a message to the audience without giving the message, or by occluding the message so carefully that it takes a great deal of effort to unpack. And I kept finding myself looking at Steve Densley on the screen and saying, I should not have to work so hard to understand what it is that you're trying to tell me.
Yeah. I personally, from my watching of this, I just was like, I'm going to go really hard and not nuanced, if that's okay with most people. I am going to roast this guy because this is what a slimy slime ball slime master sounds like when they're doing slimy apologetic things. But what's the definition of proof anyway? So I have nothing but disdain for his way that he argues this.
Well, yeah, and I will tell you that when I heard the title of the talk, which is, quote, proving the church is true, unquote, that's the title of the talk, proving the church is true. I came to this with certain expectations. which is that he might actually engage in trying to prove the church is true. I thought maybe there would be some evidence. What does he think is the most evidence that proves the church true? And yet he went for a full 60 minutes with hardly an inhale, without mentioning one piece of evidence. He managed to navigate his entire argument without hitting any evidence. So what it actually is whether we can prove the church is true. That's really what he's talking about. It's all theory and no substance. And even his theory has a lot of problems. So the first thing he has to do, the first thing he has to do is he has to dumb down what proof means. So he's going to go off on all these definitions. And really, I think it's not the most straightforward presentation. And I think it's because if it were straightforward, it would be much easier to see the tricks that he's pulling. So he's got to dumb down the definition of proof to make it something that is much less than what we would think of it in proof in any other situation when we're talking about proving the church is true. And in order to get there, first thing he does is he talks about, okay, well, what about knowledge? And we know the church is true. We testify, we know with every fiber of our being that the church is true. So the first thing is that if we know the church is true, right? If we know the church is true, then it was proved to us in some way. Therefore, he's got to take knowledge first off, and he's got to dumb knowledge down. He's going to redefine knowledge down by a couple of stories, and one in particular about a girl bearing testimony, and then a story about, whoever it was, John Taylor, Joseph Fielding Smith. Who was the guy who was getting called to the position as stake president of
Wilford Woodruff, maybe?
Or Heber J. Grant.
Heber J. Grant, yeah.
Yeah. Stake president. I just came to me. Of course, you have a picture of it, and that's what recalled it to my mind. And this whole thing where what he's going to say is that knowledge is actually just belief. Knowledge is belief. Belief is knowledge. And that's going to set the stage for him to do the same thing with proof. That proof isn't really proof. Proof is just sharing information regardless of whether the person on the other end agrees with it.
Yeah. And that's a really critical point when you pointed that out when we were going over this, is listen to what RFM just said, is that it doesn't matter if you actually are doing a good job convincing somebody, because other people will always be in opposition anyway to, they'll have a vested interest is one of his main points. They'll have a vested interest. They have skin in the game for everyone wanting to disprove Mormonism. So you need to start with the assumption that it's true, that the proof that you've gotten, your testimony, that it is proof. And then anyone else who doesn't believe it, it's because they don't want to actually do the actions that it would take to ensure their eternal salvation, to do the things to change, to be Mormon, all of those things. It's not like we can't just, put the burden of proof on the church for having to actually put forward what would make sense to our logical brains of how most people would convert. It's no, people just don't want to convert. They don't want it to be proven to them. So he admits far too much in even the way that he's trying to argue. But again, he's talking to a group at the Apologetics conference for Mormons. So it's fun to get our hands on something like this. To be like, wow, no, that's your angle. Interesting.
Yeah, it's basically an abdication of the fight. He's given up the fight. He's raised the white flag. He says we can't win it by using regular definitions. So we're going to redefine everything so that we actually can prove the church is true. It's just that proof doesn't mean proof and true doesn't mean true anymore.
Right. So should we get started?
Absolutely. And I'll leave a little bit more for the end because there's more stuff that he says along the lines of what you said. But we'll start with his beginning proposition, which is, I think that knowledge is not knowledge. It's really just belief.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, thank you, Radio Free Mormon, for coming on the Nuancehoe YouTube channel for this very special episode. I can't thank you enough. Everybody in the comments is excited that you're here for this collaboration. I always think back to, I am here so much because of you. You were the first ex-Mormon podcast of any kind that my husband ever pressed play on. And he said, if I listen to this, I probably will end up leaving the church. And it was an RFM podcast.
I had no idea of this. I don't know.
2017 or something. Yeah, I probably have. And so thank you for all the work that you do. And I guess we can get going. So you told me to include this first slide. Tell me why you wanted to include this.
Well, because I was talking with Bill about the discussion we were going to be having today, and he said, oh, hey, how about this slide? Because he remembered this slide. and that doesn't quite have all the language on it. It gets cut off on the right. Do you want to take me and you off the screen for a second so we can read the whole thing, or whatever you need to do to configure that? But this is not Steve Densley. No, this is Daniel C. Peterson, the Artful Dodger of Mormon Apologetics, as I named him some time ago. And this is an actual quote from him, September 4th, 2017, when he let his guard down and said what he actually thinks. Apparently, it was in a speech entitled, "Can There Be Any Valid Criticisms of the Church?" And his answer is no, mainly because if you assume a fortiori, he doesn't use that term, if you assume a priori and a fortiori that the church is true, then there can be no genuine evidence that it is false. That makes sense, doesn't it? It's logically correct. Of course, the problem is making the assumption in the first place before you encounter the evidence. I say this a lot. I'm going to say it again because it's worth repeating. This is like the most famous Sherlock Holmes quote ever, when he says to Watson, "It is a capital mistake to begin to theorize before one has all the evidence. Insensibly, one begins to twist the facts to fit the theory instead of the theory to fit the facts." And what Sherlock Holmes is talking about there is exactly what Daniel C. Peterson is doing. He's assuming the facts at the very outset. He already knows what the theory is. So when he encounters the facts, he knows which ones to accept, the ones that fit his theory, he's predetermined, and which ones to reject, the ones that don't fit his theory. That's not the way to arrive at truth. That's the way to stay where you are and never change your mind in spite of what the evidence is. And this is right underneath it, where it's, and this is from Miston Sunday School, by the way, if you can't see it.
Right.
I want to give them credit for this. The definition from Wikipedia of begging the question is, to beg the question is to assume the truth of the conclusion of an argument in the premises in order for the conclusion to follow. So that's assuming the truth of the conclusion, exactly what Daniel C. Peterson is doing here. And I think to a certain extent, it's what Steve Densley is doing. It's not the best fit or the most apt intro to a talk, but still, it's a lot of fun, and I didn't want it to go unremarked on.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's
and
true.
There's Heber J. Grant.
There's our man. All right, Steve
Densley. I have a nose. You have a nose, but I look at him and I think bonobo.
I think Daddy looks a lot like me, actually.
Did I get that right?
Bonobos?
Yes.
A type of like wannabe chimp, the off-brand of chimpanzees.
Oh no, it's wrong. It's some other thing. Anyway, you're right. I'm wrong. I'm thinking of whatever ape it is that has a rather remarkable proboscis.
I only know the main ones. The branding for apes, chimps, and gorillas have taken over that market. Sorry.
That's right. Okay. I'll try and look it up while you're playing this. Are you going to play this now?
Yep. All right. We're starting with, is the bar set too high?
Is the box set too high?
Bar.
I'd like you to consider what kinds of things you would say have been proven to you. And how is it that you say they've been proven to you? Would you say that you're convinced that the church is true? And if so, do you think it would be worthwhile to spend your time trying to convince other people that the church is true? Not that we should fight or Bible bash, but should we offer reasons that may help people be convinced that the church is true? As we think about the kinds of things we may want to prove, I wonder if sometimes we set the bar too high.
There you go. Real early on in the talk, he wants to raise the question of whether we've set the bar too high. You know, this almost sounds like a Brad Wilcoxism. You know, some people are saying, why can't you prove the church is true? I think we should be asking, have we set the bar of proof too high?
Yeah, when I first heard that, my reaction was, as somebody who, for a living, basically, I talk about the reasons that the church isn't true and is, you know, harmful, for instance. You would never hear me in my commitment to like logic and reason say like, guys, have we just been trying to prove the church isn't true and been convinced of it? And is the bar set too high? You'd never hear me say that. Like, you guys, you're thinking about this all wrong. No, I know that the reason and the logic is on our side. I know there's 8 billion people on Earth, and Mormonism is not this stone cut out of the mountain like they say that it is that's going to fill the whole Earth. I know it's not a popular proposition. So when it's been around for 200 years and conversion's not happening, they need to be like, you know what? The bar is just set too high. I would never make that argument, but it's funny.
I know, to hear it coming from an apologist and an attorney at that, because what you're saying right now is you're already getting the white flag halfway up the pole by saying we can't prove the church is true. I mean, this is fair Mormon. This is their whole job, is proving the church is true. And he's admitting we can't prove the church is true using the commonly understood definition of proof. So maybe, just maybe, we've set that bar too high. We need to lower the bar of proof for Mormonism in the Book of Mormon. Once we get it sufficiently low, hey, we got a shot.
All right, next one.
By the way, can I say something? I was doing a little Googling. Ironically, the monkey I was thinking of is called the proboscis monkey.
I've never even heard of that. Is that? I got a smart audience.
Yes, Bradley Grant says proboscis monkey. I looked it up. I looked monkey with long nose, and up comes the and I'd already said the long proboscis or proboscis.
My mouth is hurting from smiling so much. It's going to be a long.
Can you just Google it? I want you to see it. I can't share my screen. I'm not that technologically adept.
Okay.
Proboscis monkey.
Okay, I'll have to after we play the next one.
Okay, but you got to compare it with this. Remember this picture of Heber J. Grant, so you can appreciate the similarities.
All right, we're going to do some more begging of the question. This is his cricket story and how personal experience shapes belief. And this, you'll see what I mean by just like the slimiest slime of like, that's not helpful, but all right.
This is a story that never happened, being told as if it did.
And I like the way that he's going to tell it as if he's like a stand-up comedian, and it's not that great of a story. Now that's Steve.
I recently heard a Utah attorney talk about reading stories to his son in his backyard at night. And he said that his son, at some point, he turns to him and he says, "Dad, you know what I don't believe in?" And he said, "No, son, what is it you don't believe in?" And he said, "I don't believe in crickets." And he said, it's like a really odd thing for this son to say, because they're sitting there in the backyard and they're surrounded by the sound of crickets. He says, "Why don't you believe in crickets, son?" And he said, "Because I've never seen one." So because this young man had never seen a cricket, even though he's surrounded by the sound of crickets, and even though obviously he had heard other people talk about crickets, he decided he was going to not believe in crickets because he hadn't seen them. So the idea that someone cannot really know something.
Give it a sec.
Unless they've seen it, seems to be an increasingly pervasive idea in our society. This may explain why I've noticed an increasing discomfort among members of the church with saying, "I know the church is true."
Yeah, can you stop right there for a second?
We used to commonly hear in testimony meeting phrases like,
because he's going to segue there from the ridiculous story about the kid, "I don't believe in crickets," to another story. And I just wanted to comment on the first story first. This is a story. It never happened. If it did, it's a goofy story told by a kid who apparently lives in a family that puts a lot of emphasis on believing or not believing things. Otherwise, I expect that's why he came up with this idea. I don't believe in crickets. Well, I think that the point of the story, if anything, is to cast in a rather ridiculous light those people who do not believe the truth claims of Mormonism simply because they haven't seen A, B, or C, even though they're actually surrounded by the sound of crickets and surrounded by people who are witnesses to the actuality of crickets, who have seen them and who know that they exist. What do you think about that story, and what was its purpose?
Yeah, I think, as you said, he's going to lead into the idea that everything is, constantly proving the church is true around him, that this is like, the church is obviously a true thing, just like crickets are obviously in existence. And we live in a culture where it's like people need to have proof when it's all around them. They just like don't want to see it. So, not to mention, if that happened in Utah, I don't know about anybody else who lives in Utah. I've never heard crickets really in Utah very often. But
maybe this lawyer friend with the perhaps apocryphal child didn't live in a place that was in Utah. He lived in a place that had lots of crickets.
Yeah. Overall, I think this is just one of those misleading types of, and like just non-analogous things between spiritual claims of things that are religious in nature, of things that are actually provable. And he's going to, throughout this entire speech, he's going to be really muddying the waters between things that we actually do know. And like, we don't really know anything. Everything is kind of subject to this wishy-washy place. It's like, we know crickets exist. Okay. All right.
He's going to give a lot of examples to try and fumble his way toward his point. The next one is actually getting more on point to what he wants to develop, where he talks about people bearing testimony in fast and testimony meeting. And he is going to work this around to claiming that knowledge is simply belief.
It's like, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the church is true. I can't remember the last time I've heard that kind of terminology. I think that our approach to bearing our testimonies is...
I'll go to the next clip now too that continues on that. Girls'
nature to be true. They may be worried about appearing judgmental, not wanting to suggest what others should think or do. They may hesitate to say that they know the church is true because of the responsibility that comes with that statement. Some may say, I have a testimony the church is true, or stated in different terms, I have faith, but I don't want to suggest that I can prove it to others. Of course, the girl should be commended for using words to express her testimony. We're going to go back to the of course
part. Notice he lists several reasons why a person might want to say I believe instead of I know, all of which are strained and very unlikely. That's what he just got done doing. And if you can take it back 5 seconds, now he will go to what is the obviously most likely reason why somebody says I believe, which is because they actually think that more accurately reflects their position, their spiritual, emotional, intellectual position toward a proposition, i.e. the church being true here, that I believe the church is true. And he's going to account for that finally at the end. And at the very end, he's going to follow it immediately with a but in order to discount it. So if you can go back to like 3, 4, I don't know. Did you already go back 5 seconds?
It's really hard to go back on this thing, but let me just, I'll just start it over for a sec. Yep.
Nature to be true. They may be worried about appearing judgmental, not wanting to suggest what others should think or do. They may hesitate to say that they know the church is true because of the responsibility that comes with that statement. Some may say, I have a testimony the church is true, or stated in different terms, I have faith, but I don't want to suggest that I can prove it to others. Of course, the girl should be commended.
That's where he starts it. Of course, the girl. Here's where he's going to say the obvious one, and then end it with a but.
Of course,
something else.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
For using words to express her testimony that are sincere, rather than merely repeating what she had heard others say. But I wonder if she may have had an unrealistically high expectation for where the depth and breadth of her knowledge needed to be before she
could say I know.
She says I know, right?
Yeah.
So this is dumbing down, lowering the bar on knowledge. And he's going to follow it up with a story about Heber J. Grant that we've already referred to. But yeah, we've got to dumb down knowledge. And so she wants to say I believe, but she could actually be saying I know just because she believes, because she has that bar too high on what she has to understand in order for her to say I know it's true.
Yeah. And my only other thing to add on that is I feel like the way that the church is going to survive, though, is not by this type of apologetics. I mean, I just had Quaco in here for 3 hours, and the ways in which people are changing their definitions of what even it means to be a member of the church and actually believe in the church, between like the spectrum of like this orthodoxy and more liberal or progressive Mormon ideas. Like, there's going to be a lot of people who are participating in the church who fall all over that. And so I actually think it's at least better for more people, in just a healthier psychological way, for as many people as possible to just say like, I have a belief in these things and they've helped me in this way. But he wants to kind of set up this false dilemma in my mind, like that you need to do as you said, like your belief should translate into this power of knowing. And I just don't think that's even healthy for a church to run like that. I don't think that's realistic.
Imagine the chutzpah of an individual, Steve Densley, talking about this girl. I mean, there are people who do that in the church, so they exist, right? Whether it's that girl or somebody else. But it's got to be a young person. It's got to be a girl for purposes of his, correcting them. Because what he's going to say is, even if you think that I believe correctly represents how it is you feel and believe, no, you're wrong. You actually know it. And I'm going to show you that you know it in this talk. So
exactly.
He's going to impose on other people how they believe and how they should express their belief.
Right on. Yeah, that's so interesting. Get ready, guys. Okay, this one is the Christopher Columbus one. I can't wait for you guys to watch this.
Christopher Columbus,
you could say with confidence,
I know. Grant.
Say that again.
Is he going to do the one with Christopher Columbus before he does the one about Heber J. Grant?
Yeah.
He's all over the place. And this is one of the things that's kind of disjointed about his talk. But go ahead then.
All right. This might repeat a tiny bit.
How many of you would say you know who this is? Okay. All right. I see some hands. If I were to say, I know Columbus lived.
This is the funniest part, and we do not want to overlook this. How many people would say they know who this is? Well, I do. And you raised your hand. Who is it?
Christopher Columbus.
What does he get to at the end of the story?
It's that actually you guys are so positive that this is Christopher Columbus. This is just an artist's interpretation of who Christopher Columbus is. We don't really know anything.
Well, yeah, he says artistic historians actually say this may not be Christopher Columbus at all. So I can't believe he's doing this intentionally. But what he's doing is setting us up to say, who knows who this is? I do. And then pulling the rug out from under you at the end and saying, psych, you don't know who that is, because that's probably not Christopher Columbus after all. That's not the point he's trying to make, but it's the point that comes across to me.
All right, Plitt?
Would that be an incorrect statement? It might sound odd. Nobody doubts that Columbus lived.
People, because now he's going to immediately say, would it be wrong to say, I know that Christopher Columbus lived? And of course it would. That would be a crazy thing to say. Nobody's going to say that, but he's trying to force those words into people's mouths and make it sound like it's natural and reasonable, because we know where he's going to go with this, that it's okay. Just like it's okay to say, I know Christopher Columbus lived. It's okay to say, I know a host of other things that I don't know are true. But would you ever say, I know that Christopher Columbus lived?
I mean, this is generally what the history says. I don't stake my life on it. Like, it's just part of our, like, my American history understanding of how I got to this country of where we live right now. But it's really apples and oranges to me. I don't care if who he is or what he looked like or what the paintings that artists come up with are. It's not like life or death.
Yeah, I'm not aware of anybody who's ever said about a historical figure in a non-religious context, I know that person lived.
Yeah, it's not as big of a deal as you think, Steve. It's not the home run that you're looking for. Do you want me to rewind it a sec?
If you can, just a few seconds, just so we can catch that clip so everybody will know I'm not making this up. I've watched this a number of times, much to my detriment.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I did that to you. I'm so sorry. Oh, no.
Well, I'm just trying. It takes a number of times to watch it in order to break it down and for me to understand what the heck it is he's trying to say. And I have to understand what he's trying to say before I can recognize the problems with his argument.
That lawyer training. Okay.
Some hands. If I were to say, I know Columbus lived, would that be an incorrect statement?
It would be incorrect.
It might sound odd. Nobody doubts that Columbus lived. People would probably not doubt the truth of that statement. Yet, I personally have no evidence that Columbus lived except for the witness of others, the written testimony, if you will, of others that Columbus lived. We also have some writings from Columbus, but I haven't met Columbus. I haven't seen Columbus. By contrast, my testimony of the church is based not only on the testimony of others,
it's better,
but upon my own experience with applying gospel principles.
I'm sorry, it's better. So if I can say, if you will let me get away without calling me out on saying, I know that Columbus lives, and saying, that's the dumbest thing I've ever said, and that's not correct, because any lawyer would say that. No, that's not correct. You can't say, I know that Columbus lives, just because what? Everybody accepts it? Sorry. So he's going to try and bootstrap that inaccurate statement now to saying, if I can say that Columbus lives just because other witnesses have written about him, well, if I say the church is true, I've got witnesses, and I've got this, and I've got this, I've got plus, plus, plus. So I've got so much more reason to say the church is true than I do to say that I know that Columbus is true.
Yeah. It seems like a false equivalency to me, but all right, should I play?
Please.
Archaeological evidence, word studies, experience with the Holy Ghost, and more. So why are some people who may otherwise believe in the miraculous uncomfortable when I say, I know Joseph Smith had a set of golden plates, but would not question me if I said, I know Columbus lived? One possible reason is that in modern society, we're taught that matters of religion should not be imposed on others. And while we may hold sincere beliefs, we should not suggest that others believe the same things that we do. Another reason is that the proposition that Columbus lived is universally accepted.
Sorry, he's just blathering at this point. He's now going to go through a whole bunch of other possibilities as to why it is that people don't want to say religious things are true when they're completely comfortable saying something that nobody says, which is, I know that Christopher Columbus lived and that this is Christopher Columbus. Remember, he's going to pull the rug out here at the end. However, that's not the thing. And then he chooses a non-religious issue. He says, if I said, but people would have trouble if I said, I know that Joseph Smith had gold plates. That's not a religious issue. That's a historical issue. And so, well, of course, what he's keying off of, he doesn't say it, is the witnesses to the gold plates. He needs to say what it is his argument is instead of making me infer it from what he's saying. But that's obviously what he's keying to, is the witnesses of the gold plates. I got witnesses of the gold plates, I got witnesses of Columbus. Anything that has witnesses, therefore, must be true, right?
Yeah, he does make that point quite a lot.
Yes, including, where did I write this down? I can't even remember. Oh, it's somewhere in my notes. Including the 70,000 witnesses, Our Lady of Fatima, 1917, the three shepherd children. They made a movie about that a couple of years ago. Culminated in the miracle of the sun, which was seen by 70,000 people at once. So according to Steve Densley's criteria, Steve Densley should say that he knows that Mary appeared to these people because there's 70,000 witnesses.
Right.
So it must be something more than witnesses, because he would not say that. He's pretending like witnesses are the be all and end all, but really it's only the witnesses that say the things that he already believes.
Right. There's plenty of miraculous things that happen all around the world. Hindu cultures, all different types of gods have done so many different things for people. And I am, do your thing, everybody, but witnesses of something, it's not that convincing.
And there's plenty of things around the world that have witnesses to them that never happened.
Right, yeah. All right.
In your local courthouse right now, I guarantee you there are many cases with witness testimony and declarations in it to things that never happened.
Yeah, can't wait for you to put in more of your attorney knowledge into this. All right, should I press play?
Yes, please.
Should we watch him pull the rug out from underneath us, Steve?
I hope he's going to get to that. That's a great buildup.
And one would risk being thought a crackpot if you went around saying, that Columbus is a myth. Another perhaps related reason is that very little is demanded of those who believe that Columbus lived. However, to state that the Book of Mormon is true or that Joseph Smith was a prophet is to cross a line. On one side of the line, you can go on living as you have. But once you cross that line, you'll need to change. You'll need to start doing some things you'll have to give some things up. Maybe your time, your money, perhaps some personal acquaintances. You may need to change your eating habits. You may need to lose some or all of your personal practices, the stakes are much higher. In fact, it may be said that if the matter of the truthfulness of the church were put to a jury, no one would be able to sit on that jury because everyone would have a stake in the outcome of the litigation.
Can you stop there?
Yeah, I love that. Go for it.
This is a key proposition of his, and he will return to it at the end, which I figured he would when I heard him bring it up the first time. Because what he's saying is, if we're proving the church is true, there's no jury that can be seated that can decide the issue. Because his premise is that if you don't believe the church is true already, and if you don't want to believe the church is true, if you don't desire to believe the church is true, then you are not impartial, you are partial. You're biased on the other side of it because you don't want to believe the church is true, regardless of the evidence that's presented, because it will require so much of you if you allow yourself to be persuaded that the church is true. He's going to come back to this at the end. Ultimately, what he's going to say, and I'll say it right now, ultimately he's going to say that the only way that you can prove the church is true is if you pack the jury with 12 people who want to believe the church is true. That's the only way. There's no such thing in his model as an impartial juror. They're either partial one way or the other. The other way will never be convinced. So we have to pack the jury with 12 people who want to believe the church is true before we've got a shot in hell of convincing them and proving to them that the church is true. So that's the first part about his statement. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you eloquently did a good job explaining that. And furthermore, I just think about the type of God of Mormonism, this person. What would you call it in, when you're trying to defend somebody and they keep like shooting themselves in the foot, and it's like, you're not making your case any easier for us. So I think he's trying to say, like, people, they don't want to reform their lives. They don't want to commit to this. It's just like the truth, the guilty take it, the truth to be hard. That kind of angle of like, people just, they're so resistant and filled with Satan and all of those things that Mormons have said for millennia about people who don't accept the gospel are evil. So I really dislike the way that he's packing his language with, that people just, it's not a logical thing. It's just that they have hardened their hearts. He's using that kind of language, but I think that the Mormon church in and of itself is just not convincing. It's like the prophets have done everything opposite that would help us to prove that it's true. They're behind on the civil rights movement. They're opposing the equal rights amendments. They're doing everything years and years behind. And it just reminds me of if you're trying to defend somebody in court and you'd be like, shut up. Like, the witness is in contempt of court. Like, you're not helping your case for the last 200 years. We're just happening to discover a lot of it right now. So.
Right. So about this proof, you can't prove the church is true because nobody's unbiased. And all those people, the vast majority of people out there, don't want to believe the church is true because of all that it would require from them. By the way, that premise, which is fundamental to his argument, I can disprove in 2 words. 2 words. Mm-hmm. You know what they are? Jack Mormon. A Jack Mormon is
still believe it
by definition, right? Who believes the truth claims of the church, but does not live the principles, like whatever you're drinking out of that. So,
milk.
But you know what I mean? We have them. We have a name for those people in the church. So obviously there is a group of people who are able to believe that the church is true in spite of not feeling this compulsion to follow every edict that comes from Salt Lake City. So I think right there, his argument falls.
Yeah, well said. Not to mention, I'm sorry for bringing up Kwaku again, but that was a very popular interview that I did. And most people on the Mormon side and the ex-Mormon side, 90% of people were like, he's talking about a Mormonism that doesn't exist, where people are able to just like have sex before they're married and they're not feeling guilty for it. And then they just repent really quick and then go through the temple. And he's like, yeah, we're a totally sexually liberated Mormon Utah society where there's plenty of people who believe these things, but they don't live them. So
I did not watch all of that. I watched the first part, but is it true that Kwaku was bemoaning the outcast state of having so many ad hominems flying back and forth between the different factions? Was he complaining and saying it was so sad that people are calling everybody else names?
Yeah, and I in preparation for that, I watched your debate with him and the bros, and it's really something for him to say, but I wanted to get him on record of at least saying that it's not something he approves of, I guess.
I'm glad you did, because within 2 weeks later, he's on Psych Ward Radio with his friends, Dr. Demento and Jesus Jr., and they devoted an entire episode to lambasting me.
Really?
Yeah, and I thought, okay, one of these things doesn't go together. There's Kwaku over here who says it's so sad that we call each other's names, and then there's the Kwaku over here who can't get enough of it. So I think it depends. Kwaku's answer to that question depends on what day it is.
Well, you're far above them, and your insults are even more intelligent, so.
That's why they don't get them.
Okay, I think
it's a wonderful thing to stick the knife in without their even knowing.
That's why I'm like, I don't really need to work that hard at disproving the church or anything like that. I just kind of talk about the evidence with my friends and people's lived experiences. I don't need to fight and like grasp at straws and say
no,
things.
or you can just watch Word Radio. In their attempts to defend the church, they're destroying it. It was sometime after the debate was over. I shouldn't even be saying we got to talk about, but I'll just mention this one thing. It was a remarkable experience. I'm glad I had the experience, and it wasn't until it was over that I realized that if I had said nothing on the stage that night, I still would have won the debate.
Yeah, and that's why when I interviewed Quake, I was just like, put him on record for what his beliefs are. I don't need to push back very much. He's going to be describing what he believes inside his head. But
that's what we did when we
Psych
had
Ward Radio. That was the Psych Ward Radio. That's a deep cut. That's a real deep cut.
I just came up with Dr. Demento and Jesus Jr. I think that's got staying power.
Because Kwaku does have a history. I don't want to go too.
I was talking about Cardin and Brad.
Yeah, that too. All right, back into it.
Yes.
All right, did he pull the rug out from under?
Incidentally, this picture hangs in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York.
What?
I said he hasn't pulled the rug out yet, and then you started playing and I went, oh, here it is. This is where he pulls the rug out. After having based all of this on this argument, now he's going to say, oh, by the way, psych.
New York, and on the tag it says portrait of a man said to be Christopher Columbus. So although you may have felt confident that this is a painting of Christopher Columbus, art historians aren't so sure.
Now, remember, Steve, you started this whole thing off by saying, how many people would say they know who this is? We raised our hands. Well, I guess we were wrong, because apparently that's just the man who's said to be Christopher Columbus. That's totally up in the air as to whether that's a painting that's supposed to be Christopher Columbus.
Yeah, I think he thinks he's smarter than he thinks he is, or that he actually is. I'm sorry.
Well, to state the obvious, what he's done is he has committed us to a statement of knowing something is true when later on he says, by the way, it's not necessarily true, which example further undercuts his entire talk.
Can't wait to see. All right, I'm see if I have anything else on
this. One girl who felt uncomfortable saying, I know the church is true, is in good.
Yes, this is the Heber J. Grant.
In good company. Okay, so should we play the Heber?
This is the story, which is he tells from somebody else who told it. He doesn't cite a source other than somebody else who told it, whose last name is Collister, but his first name is not Tad, I think. And but the whole story is designed to show that belief does mean no.
When the 23-year-old Heber J. Grant was installed as president of the Twilla stake, he told the saints he believed the gospel was true. President Joseph F. Smith, a counsel in the first presidency, inquired, Heber, you said you believe the gospel with all your heart, but you did not bear your testimony that you know it is true. Don't you absolutely know the gospel is true? Heber answered, I do not. Joseph F. Smith then turned to John Taylor, the president of the church, and said, I'm in favor of undoing this afternoon what we did this morning. I do not think any man should preside over a stake that has not a perfect and abiding testimony of the divinity of this work. President Taylor replied, Joseph, 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 Heber knows it just as well as you do. The only thing that he does not know is that he knows it. Within a few weeks, that testimony was realized, and young...
I'm sorry, you can leave the tagline. He's going to say within a few weeks, Heber J. Grant's all influence, and now he says, I know, with tears in his eyes.
Yep. Should I play that?
Please do. That's only fair.
Heber J. Grant shed tears of gratitude for the perfect, abiding, and absolute testimony that came into his life.
There we go. All right. So what is the purpose of telling that story?
To say that people, they actually, when they know something and they have a belief in it, that's just the same as actually like knowing it. So just jump right to the knowing. Just confess that you know things beyond a shadow of a doubt. Use some type of emotional manipulation with tears in your eyes, right? I just think it really points to this problem where they want to switch between things that are, just generally emotion-based, like religious convictions, and like knowledge-based to try to play in the big leagues with proofs. But it's just non-analogous, like, to me. It's just
I think if we take I'm sorry.
All I was gonna say is just obviously when you're in a religious context where everything psychologically is making you look for reasons to believe things more firmly, you have so many different programs that are going to tell you to believe those things when you don't actually know them. You have people telling you, you know it, you don't know that you know it. It's just psychologically manipulative. And this is, again, I think this is undercutting his argument that it's true. This is a terrible story to say. This is like peer pressure.
Yeah, if we follow it out, nobody actually believes the church is true. Anybody who believes the church is true really knows the church is true. There's no intermediate space from not believing
Isn't that weird?
to knowing. If you believe, you actually know. And that's exactly what he has John Taylor telling Joseph Fielding Smith. Heber knows it's true just as well as you or I do. The only thing he doesn't know is that he knows it's true.
It's just psychological programming to internalize something for like a high demand fundamentalist religion. Color me shocked.
Yeah, and I would say that the story as it's told takes belief and raises it to the level of knowledge, but it does the same work that Steve Densley wants it to do as taking knowledge and lowering it to the level of belief, making knowledge equal belief and belief equal knowledge. So he's lowering the bar on knowledge, what it takes to convince us that it's true, so that it can then proceed with his main point, which is lowering the bar on proof and what that means, so that it is not so hard to prove that the gospel is true.
Right. All right. This is my personal favorite one. This is the stories about, like you said, knowledge, proof, and then the Hugh Nibley quote is in this one.
True. When people bear their testimony, they sometimes give examples of what they mean and how they know that the church is true. This knowledge is often explained in terms of an inner spiritual experience. Sometimes people speak of experiences with other members of the church and how they've blessed their lives. Sometimes they explain the teachings of the church and how they make sense to them. It seems that generally when people say they know the church is true, they're saying they've been convinced of one or more of the following: that the leaders of the church are called of God, that they bear God's authority to oversee the administration of saving ordinances to teach the Word of God, and to teach the Word of God, that the members of the church are followers of Jesus Christ, that Jesus Christ is our Savior, that the doctrines taught by the church and the scriptures of the church are correct. Whatever the approach, people seem less concerned when others stand at the pulpit and share their testimony that they know the church is true than about the idea that you can prove the church is true. Even among those who would stand and testify they know the church is true, there sometimes seems to be a belief that it would be improper to suggest that the truth of the church can be proven to someone else. Surprisingly, while Hugh Nibley would seem to have spent his life gathering evidence in support of the truth of the Book of Mormon, he once said, "The evidence that will prove or disprove the Book of Mormon does not exist." I'll talk more later about what Hugh Nibley meant by this, but for now, let me just...
I will just say that what he's doing in the first thing, where he's talking about all the different things that members mean or could mean when they say, I know the church is true, all of it has really very little to do with proof that the church is true. It was the part before, that the members are followers of Jesus Christ, that I've been helped by members of the church, that I think the leaders of the church are, they're prophets of God, whatever it might be. So if those things, and once again, he doesn't connect the dots on this like I am, but I think I'm correct in understanding his message. If those things, if that list of things can be used by a member of the church to stand in front of the congregation and say, I know this church is true. Therefore, those things on which that testimony is based were sufficient to prove to that individual that the church is true. And here's where he's not going to link it up at all in any meaningful way, which is if we share that kind of information, not proof, but just share that kind of information with people, then it can lead them to a point where they like what it is the church teaches. It's attractive. Families can be together forever, whatever it is. And you put them in a position where they are desirous to believe the church is true because they like the doctrines, they like the lifestyle, they like the whatever. If you can make it so a person wants to believe the church is true, then you've got the chance. Now you can prove to them the church is true by presenting evidence for them to want to believe it's true. And so once you pack that jury with 12 people who want to believe the church is true, then you got a chance at proving it true. That's what it all comes down to.
Yeah, perfectly stated. I have nothing to add, honestly. Yeah.
We'll talk about Hugh Nibley's quote.
Yeah. All right. Should we play that?
Yeah, we just did. It's right up there. The evidence that will prove or disprove the Book of Mormon does not exist. What did you think?
So therefore, go back to that list of the things. That's why I want to put it full screen. Go back to the list. When I was Mormon, I would have said, I have a testimony of a lot of these things. I have felt a spiritual witness of these. I believe in these things because the way I was raised was told to me that to get love from my family, my community, all of those things are kind of the checklists of what you need to confess to be kind of part of the club. But again, it goes back to, for me, like a social conditioning of it. It's not that like we're going to prove or disprove it in a sacrament meeting. You're just there to kind of all be in a circle jerk with each other. So it's not, like you said, it's about packing the jury. It's not about actually getting down to the evidence of whether or not it's true. It's people's emotional conditioning to want to follow the leader. So.
Yeah, so here we've got Hugh Nibley, who spent his entire life being a high-level, very high-profile apologist for the church, decades and decades, his entire career. He's writing apologetics for the church, and he's making apologetic presentations. And he has studied it to the point where if anybody knows all the evidence in favor of the church, he does. The problem is that he also knows the evidence that is not in favor of the church. And he doesn't talk about that like he talks about the evidence that is in favor of the church because he's an apologist. But this person, Hugh Nibley, who's nobody is going to give short marks on for being dumb or unintelligent or uneducated or unknowledgeable, still says the evidence that will prove or disprove the Book of Mormon does not exist because he has studied it enough to realize that the best thing he can walk away with on this is a draw.
Exactly. Yeah.
And this is where the apologists have been going ever since. And this is an example of this talk by Steve Densley. All right. The talk by Steve Densley is another in a lengthening list of talks and theories that are being promoted that assert that they have found the key to allowing you to prove that the Book of Mormon or Mormonism is true without ever once encountering any evidence.
Mm-hmm.
There's no fight. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. There's no fight. No fight takes place. But we're going to say, and Steve Densley will say it in a brief part here at the end as well. What we're going to do is we're going to say, well, we can't prove it's true, and they can't prove it's false, and therefore it's a draw. Imagine Hugh Nibley saying this about any other book than the Book of Mormon. Because, of course, there are books that you can prove are true, that are actually histories of certain areas of the world, even long past, but not the Book of Mormon. And the reason why is because it's not that it doesn't have, it's two things. It doesn't have enough evidence for it, and it has too much evidence against it. So what they're hoping for them, a draw is a win. Because if they can't claim a draw and leave the field and claim victory in a draw or a stalemate or a hung jury, right? Without ever dealing with the evidence, that's the best they can hope for. They're not even trying to win anymore. That's how bad the evidence is.
Yeah. And the only thing I'll add to that, yeah, very perfectly stated, is if you remember back to kind of how he was talking about before, it's like anyone who is skeptical, it's another one of his main points. It's like people who are already skeptical are not going to be convinced and we're not going to win this. So anyone who is skeptical, they basically get thrown out. They have skin in the game because they're involved in a different type of logic land. So that's why he has to redefine what proof means. You know, he has no actual interest in engaging with the skepticism. And I wanted to ask you, like, you know, as an attorney, who's somebody who sees this kind of argumentation, I'm sure in your profession, I feel like it's just like a slimy attorney who would go up and say something like, you know, I know that you guys think that the video camera footage of, you know, the defendant over here proves this, that he was involved in this kind of crime. But if we actually think about, you know, what does video camera footage even mean? What are fingerprints at the scene? What is that really all about? And trying to be like skeptical of like the processes and trying to remove people's and change people's perceptions of what they even know, so that it's not even engaging in the fact of like proving or disproving. It's just trying to like put the onus and the burden of proof on like the jury themselves, of questioning their own sanity, questioning themselves. That makes sense. Like it's not even engaging with the problems. It's kind of removing it and making people feel a type of cognitive dissonance, that they feel more comfortable in making this draw. Like, engage in the actual stuff here, guys.
Well, there is the old joke about the closing argument by the defense attorney saying, well, other than a signed confession, DNA in the blood at the scene of the crime, and 3 eyewitnesses, what have they got?
Yeah. Do attorneys do that? I feel like that's just, I don't know if I've seen too many movies, but it's just
here's the thing, is that attorneys represent clients, and clients don't always have the best side of the facts, and they don't always have the best side of the law, but it's still up to the attorney to try and come up with an argument to make to the judge, right? Or to the jury. And it is a colloquialism among attorneys locally, though I don't know that it's, you know, anybody else has heard of it, but it's called building a log cabin. If an attorney, and I've done this too, every attorney has done this, has made arguments that they don't believe are going to win, but they still got to present it as if they do. Other attorneys can see this. The judge can see this too. And when an attorney is making an argument and working so hard to make this argument and construct this argument that there's no chance in hell the judge is ever going to buy, that's what we call, oh, he's building a log cabin. Yep. He's expending all this effort to build this log cabin. Right. The judge is never going to buy it. And you can see it from a mile away, generally, if you're a lawyer. This is what Steve Densley is doing. He's building a log cabin. And I do want to say one thing here, because I don't want to forget this. And this is maybe the most important thing I can say, is that what he is saying is, if you want to believe the Book of Mormon is true, then you can have it proved to you. Okay? There's nobody in the world who wanted the Book of Mormon to be true more than I did. There's nobody in the world who wanted Mormonism to be true more than I did. There's nobody in the world who wanted the leaders to be prophets, seers, and revelators more than I did. But at the end of the day, the evidence changed my opinion. It wasn't a matter of my desire. It was a matter of the evidence. Steve Densley. And that's completely opposite of his talk.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I believe you. You worked in Mormon apologetics for a long time. You taught classes on it. Like, you knew this stuff and you defended it So,
and that's why I released those. It wasn't just a trip down memory lane. And I knew that my listeners aren't going to want to hear me when I was 29 teaching a college level course at the Institute building at the University of Texas at Austin in the spring of 1989 about defending the faith. But I also wanted to establish the fact that I had done that so people could have a better understanding of where I came from and why it is that I hold the positions that I do now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's honorable to come full circle around. Well, in the year of my birth, you were out being a Mormon apologist. How times have changed. Look at us now.
This was the most
unkind
cut of all.
I know.
Twist
I want to finish playing this clip. I really like the end of this clip as well.
Let me just say that often when we speak of proving something, we're talking about demonstrating the truth of it to others. That's usually what we're saying. When someone states that they know the church is true, in some sense they're saying that it has been proven to them. So we may say that we know something, even if we feel unable to prove it to others.
There's the connection that he was making between knowing it and it's been proven to them.
Yeah. Okay. Next one. Would you trust science or eat food? Steve Densley asks.
This is such a belabored analogy. It's painful. Yeah. So in other words,
this is painful.
If you go into a restaurant and eat food, right? In spite of the fact that 3,000 people a year die of foodborne illnesses in restaurants, right? Would you say that I know that I'll be safe eating this food? No, nobody says that because everybody knows that there are possibilities.
Risks in life.
Yeah. You know, the rats in the back, the dead rats they're picking up with the tongs that David Alexander talked about at the Yellow Deli restaurants where he used to work. Yes, there are possibilities of foodborne illnesses, and you can't get back in the kitchen and look generally. And generally, they're designed so that you can't get back in the kitchen and look. So yeah, it's a matter of faith. It's a matter of faith. It's not knowledge. But he's going to try and bootstrap that into saying it's reasonable to say, I know that I will be safe if I eat out. And nobody says that because nobody believes that.
Exactly. And not to mention,
I'm sorry, any more than they say, I know that Columbus lived. I apologize. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. You're making such excellent points. And the only thing I'll add to that is I just really like these non-analogous things that he's trying to like spark something in people who, I don't know, don't have as many critical thinking lanes developed, where he's like, you know how Columbus is this picture, and you know how you'd eat out, and you know how science is constantly being proven wrong. And it's one of those gish galloping kind of arguments where he's just throwing out things that make people be like, yeah, and go along with it. And it's like, no, wait, hold up one second, because we're talking about apples and oranges here. Because if you actually do, eat out somewhere or, and get food poisoning, and so forth, we have like a laws, and we have systems where you could file something, you could sue, you could get some kind of recompense, like you could get your money back. Like I always think back to this time there's a barbecue place in Salt Lake where the people who were running it was Dickey's Barbecue, and they accidentally put lye inside the like iced tea instead of sugar. Somebody mixed that up and it killed a woman, and I have never recovered from that. But that's a big mistake, and I'm like, that stuff happens, but it's not a freaking like church run by Jesus Christ. Dickey's Barbecue isn't a church run by like, the creator of the universe who's giving his words down to his prophets and telling them how to run the barbecue place. But I'm like, but mistakes happened, and that family sued and got millions of dollars, right? I'm like, it's an apples and oranges thing. People are trying to sue right now, like I forgot his name. It's not Huntsman, yeah, for back tithing and things. So I'm like, we get no like justification or represents like at all from being in the church for so long, giving tithing, and then finding out that so much has been hidden from us. But people in the judicial system, they're constantly trying to get justice. I'm like, that would be nice. That would be nice if you had some rights within the church. You don't have rights within the church when you complain and say this isn't okay. So it's just it's a dumb analogy to me overall, but
it is layers deep, obviously. I know we're going to give him a chance to say it. I know we've been criticizing it endlessly, but trust us, he's going to say exactly what we're saying. It is the same thing as saying that I'm going to drive from my place to your place, and you're in Utah, right? And I know that I will arrive there, period. Nobody says that. You know why?
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody knows there's a host of things that could happen that would prevent it. Some less serious, some more serious. If I take an airplane flight from point A to point B, I'm never going to say, I know that I will arrive there. I'm scheduled to arrive there. I will say, I plan on being there. I hope to be there. But all I'm doing is showing that he is transporting this word no into positions where it does not belong. And it would belong equally as effectively and correctly in the car analogy and in the plane trip analogy as it does in the eating food in a restaurant analogy.
Yeah. I guess it's just like your typical kind of straw man argument too, or it's like you're tearing down something. People don't talk like that. But
He's just making stuff up. He is making up examples that don't fit, and his audience is too nice to call him on it and tell him, no, I would never say that. In fact, as an attorney, you know you would never say it either. I mean, attorneys are famous for being hyper exact, which is one of the reasons that they're such a pain in the ass to talk to with normal people. You try and have a conversation with an attorney, and they get hooked up on all of these possibilities or whatever. The classic joke about it is an attorney in a car is driving by a field and there's a cow in the field, and the wife says, oh, isn't that a beautiful brown cow? And the attorney looks and it says, well, he's brown on this side.
I like that. Oh,
So
tell my dad that. My dad has a lot of lawyer jokes.
He is violating a ton of stuff that he knows as a lawyer in order to bastardize it to make it conformable to Mormonism.
Exactly. Bastardizing his, his training for Mormonism. That is what historians do. That's what lawyers do. Anyone at these Fair Mormon conferences, they come out with like this type of title because in the real world, this is how I'm known. And then they can use this for this bastardized version to uphold a $100 billion corporation. It's really cool stuff.
This is one of the ways in which Mormonism, as well as I'm sure other religious and whatever types of theories, isms, corrupt people. And they corrupt their knowledge, and they corrupt their experience, and they corrupt their abilities because they knowingly, I think generally they got to know it. Maybe it's subconscious to some extent. They twist those and they undermine those and they misuse those in the service of the church. But the people who are out there who are not lawyers typically can't see that that's what they're doing.
Right.
And I think that that's a good takeaway from this show about this talk by Steve Densley.
100%. Exactly. And that's why I kind of titled this that like Mormon lawyer argues it's true. How we know he's lying. Because that's exactly the point why I wanted you to make that my title was leading to. It's he knows better. Like so many different people in these professions, whether it's lawyer, historian, Egyptologist. Oh man, they know better.
I was having a discussion about this with somebody else the other day. It was actually Rabbi Joe. Rabbi Joe getting on his Palomino and riding into the sunset. No, Rabbi Joe. And I was just telling him, okay, here's what you have to understand. Okay. Leaders of the church and other religionists who want to convert you. Okay. They're not lying to you in order to deceive you. They're lying to you in order to save you. And that's all the difference in the world. They're not trying to deceive you. They're trying to help you out so you can get to the celestial kingdom too. And if we have to shade things and omit things and say things different than exactly the way they are to do it, well, that's just, it comes with the job. It's a dirty job. It's
lying for the Lord.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We're lying for the Lord. We're lying for you. I'm lying for you because I love you, Kara, and you have an immortal soul. And I will say to you, whatever it is I need to tell you in order to get you to do what it is you need to do in order to live forever with God and Jesus and your family.
Mm-hmm. It's gaslighting for righteousness, really. I was thinking of making a stand-up joke around the idea of what I did to my kids last night is I have this new mom thing because outside of this, I'm a mom. This is my other profession. And I'm taking the things I learned in the church and using them for good for my kids. So for instance, gaslighting my kids for nutrition is I mix chocolate and peanut butter together for them to dip apples in. And I put a bunch of extra nutrients and all kinds of good stuff in there, so that they think they're just eating chocolate, but it's got tons of good stuff in there. You do that when you're a parent. So I have them test it before I put all of that stuff in there. And I'm like, you guys, this is delicious, right? And then I add in all the nutrition stuff in all my little tinctures and stuff, so it's actually healthy. And then when they go to eat it for dinner, if they complain, like then when I say, you guys approved this, I had you guys test it, and you guys said you liked it. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. Just enjoy your chocolate. So I'm lying for their, strength.
But they're good.
And nutrition. So yeah, just don't tell people that's how I parent. But I gotta learn. I gotta implement something I learned from Mormonism into my actual parenting, shouldn't I? Anyway.
Yeah, and I think as a society, we recognize that that's okay with responsible adults raising children and trying to do it in a healthy, nutritious kind of way. I think the problem the church has is recognizing when its members actually become adults, because from their point of view, they never become adults. They never grow up. In this church, you never actually graduate from primary. It's all the same dumbed down stuff from birth to earth, from womb to tomb, from cradle to grave, sperm to worm, the whole 9 yards, right? It's everything. You never graduate from primary. You are a perpetual child in Mormonism, and you're treated that way. And gaslit and all these other things, which I think is okay, like you talked about, if we do it to children. But as a general rule, we wouldn't treat adults the way we treat our children, because that would be disrespectful to them and trying to take away from them the ability to make their own decisions about their own life.
Yeah, it's like an informed consent, or it's like the truth. You can't handle the truth. So just go with what you already feel good about, and that is the truth. Don't look at the man behind the curtain. Yeah. Perpetual children. That's true. That's one of the reasons me and my husband honestly started getting really annoyed with the church when we were super faithful. We're like, this is the same old stuff. We want to go into the deep doctrines, and you go into the deep doctrines. You're like, back it up. All right. I'm going to skip him talking about the food thing, since we already explained that one. So I like this one with religious proof. If anyone out there wants to know, what is religious proof? What do they point to? He goes through a nice list here, so you can stop me at any point.
Rise from the dead. This Jesus I am proclaiming to you is the Messiah, he said. Perhaps similarly, in a revelation directed to Sidney Rigdon regarding his call as a scribe to Joseph Smith, he was told that he should use the scriptures in acting as a second witness to the words of Joseph Smith. And inasmuch as you do not write, behold, it shall be given unto him to prophesy, and thou shalt preach my gospel and call on the holy prophets to prove his words, and they shall be given him. In addition to at least 5 other examples I found in the scriptures and I cite in the book, in Alma we read, and ye also behold that my brother Alma has proved unto you in many instances that the word of Christ, word is in Christ unto salvation.
I don't know if there's something that you're angling toward in this particular segment, but this is one of the places where he just adds all sorts of superfluous information that has nothing to do with his message. And all he's showing us is that he did a Google search or a computer search for the word prove as it appears in all the standard works. And now he's going to regale us with his knowledge.
He's padding his speech with it. Yeah. The reason I included it is I do agree. He's padding it, and he goes through proof by argument from the scriptures, from the Holy Ghost, through a different list of how it is proven to us. And it's mostly just the old confirmation bias. You haven't really done anything but beg the question and circular reasoning, where people who already believe in the scriptures, you're using the scriptures and what God says is proof, testing the word, living it, seeing the fruits of it, and that is all the proof that you need. So that's pretty much a summation of what he goes through here. But do you want me to skip this one, or should we keep playing?
I would love it if you skipped it. And then there's this huge part of 10 to 15, even as much as 20 minutes where he does this. And then he goes to the Old Testament and the New Testament and all the uses of proof, and goes to the Hebrew word and talks about what it means in Hebrew, and the Greek words and the different Greek words that are translated as proof. None of it has anything to do with his talk. I think it's supposed to dazzle us with his brilliance, but it does nothing toward moving the needle on his argument.
All right. So I have, that is all true.
And you know why that was so frustrating for me? Because when you listen to it the first time, you don't know. You don't know what is important to his argument and what is not important to his argument, because I'm going on faith that if the guy giving the talk is talking about something, then it's going to support his argument, right? But what he does is he starts going through all these different things and all these different Hebrew words and all these different Greek words, and I'm trying to keep track of what he's saying because I'm led to believe that there's going to be a point that he's going to come to any minute now while he's going through all this stuff. It was a huge mistake, and it gave me a headache. I'm trying to juggle all this stuff, trying to remember all the stuff that he's saying because I'm expecting he's going to tie it in, which he never does. And that was a discourtesy to his audience, at least to this member of his audience.
At least to all the people who are not already on board in the audience.
Well, you know why you never misunderstood a Bruce R. McConkie talk?
I never misunderstood anything Bruce R. McConkie said. If he said that, black people are fence sitters in heaven, I was like, that's what you're saying. I understand, plain as day.
Yes. He would tell you in every talk, he would say, this is what I'm going to talk about. And then he would talk about it. And then he would say, this is what I talked about. And he usually had lists, numbered lists in his talk. Regardless of whether you believe it, it was always very clear. Well, in almost all instances, sometimes he was a little bit slippery, but it was generally very clear what it was he was talking about. Here, this is a mass of confusion. To me, Kara, it is a massive confusion. And I don't expect you to get that quote because that's from the endowment pre-1990 when Adam is listening to the preacher. Yeah, I know. You're on 89. What chance did you have? The preacher, who's no longer in the endowment, but who was in the employ of Satan, came and preached the sermon to Adam and Eve about the nature of God, that he's so high that he sits on the top of a topless throne, yet so small that he can dwell in your heart. He can fill the expanse of the universe, all this other stuff. And I think it's Satan who says, so what do you think? And Adam goes, to me, it is a massive confusion.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I was quoting. Well, and that's what I think is Steve Densley's talk. It's a massive confusion, Steve. You need to tighten this thing up and maybe do an outline with points on it that you're trying to make.
Mm-hmm. I wish so badly that he would do something like that. I did follow it. I got his point, but he does expand quite a bit on kind of showing off his Googling skills of what different words mean. Me and where I come from, again, with the begging the question stuff, I get really annoyed with Mormon apologists, the way that they act like they care. I'm annoyed. My heart hurts. There are so many people in faith crisis who are trying to negotiate this kind of stuff, and they act like they care. These fair conferences, they act like they want to give people proof and stuff, but what they do is they just gaslight the actual lived experiences. They misinterpret and reinterpret the evidence. They change definitions of what proof is. It's just slimy to me, and it doesn't actually engage with lived experiences or the evidence whatsoever. And it's just this whole dance around to still come back to the thing that we started with, which is we're all true. We all know it's all true, but it has nothing to do with what people are actually hungering for in this space. Yeah. So it's just slimy and annoying and just patting themselves on the back.
And the people over at Fair Mormon, including Steve Densley, are just as guilty of Kwaku and company of creating a church in their own image and then saying that's the church. Because what the apologists do is they recreate a church and they recreate its doctrines in such a way as to make it defensible. They try and get rid or downplay or not mention all the stuff in the church that's not defensible. And they bring forward the stuff or change it that they think is defensible, and then they defend it. But what they end up defending is not really what the church is.
Mm-hmm. Is that like a straw man adjacent type of, where they build up something the people's lived experiences aren't actually reflecting? That's what I would say Kwaku did in my interview with him.
Yeah, and it's what Steve Densley does. It's what Dan Peterson does. It's what all of those apologists do. I mean, where is there an apologist who actually says that the church means what it says, and I'm going to go in there and I'm going to try and defend everything the church has ever done or said? It becomes difficult when it's so contradictory over time. It's hard to rationally defend contradictory statements or positions. But we've come up with ways of doing that too. He was speaking as a man, not as a prophet. How do we know he was speaking as a man, not as a prophet? Well, because God changed his mind.
So we always throw God under the bus.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's how we know. Once it gets changed, then the person who said what got changed was speaking as a man. Up until the point it gets changed, he was speaking as a prophet. And that's why in the church, if I can remember the statement correctly, a policy is simply an unchanged doctrine.
Mm-hmm. It's a good quote. Well done. Also, speaking of lawyers being the worst, Colby Reddish, my
what are you
other
doing
favorite lawyer,
this morning after that bender you pulled last night, Mr. Reddish? That's what I want to know.
What did Colby do last night?
It was a huge bender. The whole neighborhood was involved. I think the police were involved ultimately.
Sounds like him.
I just make stuff up, just like Steve Densley.
I love you, Colby. Thanks for joining in. All right, let me press play on. Let me see where we are.
When I didn't call Colby back last night, that's right. There's a reason for it, and I'll tell you about it later. It wouldn't do to talk about it.
I love all of this ex-Mormon hot goss on the inside
This is
circle.
hot goss.
All right, we haven't played this one. This is where it's ultimately spiritualized.
Ryan Gosling, by the way, hot goss.
He's the only goss that is even hot enough for me to know. Okay. Ultimately spiritualized. Should I play it?
Oh, please. Yeah.
Okay.
Completely unsatisfied. The impressions that build up definite proof are themselves non-transferable. All we can do is talk about the material at hand, hoping that in the course of the discussion, every participant will privately and inwardly form, reform, change, or abandon his opinions about it, and thereby move in the direction of greater light and knowledge. Some of the things in the book since Cumorah we think are quite impressive, but there is no guarantee at all that anyone else will think so. In this last sentence, Nibley reveals what he means by proving something to be true, a guarantee that someone else will be satisfied with the truth of some matter.
Nobody's saying that. Sorry.
No, they're not.
So while it may be
Go ahead.
true that no one can guarantee that providing evidence supporting the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon will convince all who listen that the book is true, we can be guaranteed that if nothing regarding the Book of Mormon is shared, that no one will be convinced.
Okay, so now he's going to lead into sharing information about the Book of Mormon is proving it's true regardless of the response from the other person, whether they're convinced or not.
Exactly. Flashback to what you started with. It's not about if it's actually true. It's not about if our arguments have merit. It's not if they're like based on a faulty foundation. And like we can throw out every logical fallacy that we possibly want. We can move the goalposts, just like you said, with the throwing God under the bus, and that's just a policy. Everything with Mormon apologetics and proving the church is true is taking a thought-stopping cliche or some type of wording that just comforts the doubting person, the skeptic, whoever, into for that moment saying it could be true, having some kind of window of space where you have to just suspend your disbelief for a second, have a chasm open up there with some type of word that comforts your brain, and then you do that in every different little section, and then if you desire to believe, you will allow that type of like logical inconsistency and bullcrap to make space for you to continue believing and doing the things that you want to believe. I think it's completely opposite of what his entire other point is about, like, people, they really just don't want to believe. They have a really hard time believing. I was like, what you're doing at this conference right now is you are completely putting all of your eggs in the basket of just, pack the jury. That is the thing that we're all going to stake our life on. We're going to continue believing the things that we believed. Evidence be damned, skeptics be damned. But if it's not convincing, it's not convincing to 8 billion people. It's not good arguments. That's not much else to it.
Right. And it comes down to, I can prove the church true to somebody, even if they don't agree with me, because the reason they don't agree with me is because they have skin in the game, because they would have to change their lives, because they would have to give up so much good stuff that now we can prove the church true to people and they don't have to accept it, even though we've proven it true. These are the kind of ridiculous conclusions that bad arguments can lead to. And maybe that's why he is wrapping this talk up in so much fluff and stuff that makes it hard to understand. Maybe that's why he sounds like a person who is trying to give a message without giving the message in any kind of direct or clear way. In fact, from the clips you're playing, because they were selected by us, it makes it sound more clear than what it was.
It was hard to do. Yeah.
Yes. And all that Hugh Nibley's doing is he's making the distinction between evidence and proof. And it's a very simple distinction, although sometimes they get used interchangeably by people who are not lawyers. Evidence simply means facts or testimony that has some bearing on whether a proposition is true or whether that proposition is not true. Actually, it makes it probative, but evidence is the stuff that falls on one side or the other. Proof is something entirely different. Proof is a subjective thing, and it's based on evidence generally, that if I have seen enough evidence to convince me of the truth of a proposition, then it has been proven to me. We have 12 people on juries because we realize that the same evidence that will convince one person by any given legal standard of the truth of a proposition is not always enough to convince another person because it is so subjective. And that's why we have 12 people on a jury, and they must be unanimous for a criminal trial. Everybody has to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt of the truth of the proposition and that the state has met its burden of proving each element of the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. But it's not the same for everybody. What can convince one will not convince another, even though they're looking at the exact same evidence. And that's the difference between evidence and proof. Evidence is pretty much objective. You can look at something and say it's evidence. Judges do that all the time to see if it's admissible. Is this evidence on the proposition? But whether it is evidence of the proposition is a completely different issue than whether it convinces someone or proves it to somebody. And that's all that I think Hugh Nibley's getting at here. And Steve Densley knows this. I mean, this is Law School 101.
Thank you for taking us to school. Man, well said. And
I think we're taking Steve out behind the woodshed.
We are. All right, I want to finish this, and then I have another important point I want to ask you. Let's see where else this goes.
The process of proving something to be true involves sharing information, without which there is no proof, and without which there is some hope for conversion, or with which there is some hope for conversion. If a person is converted by virtue of the testimony of a believer, that person may come to say that the matter was proven to him or her. Or if an outside believer is reporting on the circumstances, we may read, as we do in many scriptures cited above, that the matter was proven. So there are a variety of ways in which it is correct to say the gospel principles, the church, the Book of Mormon can be proven to be true.
Okay,
of course, while information of the...
Are you still want to go further?
Yeah.
Because he finally came out from behind the bushes and revealed himself when he said, it's sharing information. Proving the church true is simply sharing information.
Right on.
What does that have to do with anything? Sharing information. He doesn't even say sharing evidence. Okay. Sharing evidence is not proving the church is true. It may, if that person thinks that evidence is convincing enough to them. Yeah. But remember, evidence is objective. Proof is subjective. But now he has dumbed proof down even below sharing evidence that convinces someone. It's down even below sharing evidence, period. It is simply sharing information with somebody. And this is what he has now dumbed down or lowered the bar on proving the church is true to.
And just for anyone who's like kind of a non-Mormon listener, doesn't know how this works. I mean, I literally thought when I was Mormon, totally put my whole heart out there, and I would bear my testimony to people, like my boss that I was working for once. Who's that? Colby. You're muted. Sorry, bud. You muted yourself. You
Okay, yeah, yourself. I did. I do that from time. Hey, Randy, how you doing?
Good. Is this a good time, or are you busy?
It's a great time. I'm doing a live show with Kara Burrell, and I saw you called.
Kara, hi.
Is that Randy?
You know the scallywag, Kara?
I used to work for Randy.
She's fantastic. And we are about an hour and a half into this. We're talking about a talk that was given by Steve Densley at Fair. And I bet you want to talk about the show last Wednesday. Can I call you back on that?
Yeah, of course. And yeah, have fun with your show. I saw that Kara was doing that show. I was very anxious to watch it, so I'll tune in.
Okay, well, wait to watch it when I put it up on the RFM channel, okay?
Oh, okay, I'll do that.
All right, talk to you later.
Yeah.
Kara says bye.
Bye.
It's a lawyer cameo here.
That was fun. Oh, Randy's not a lawyer, right?
What? I thought, is he some type of, he's got to be.
No, he's not. He's an expert witness for many legal cases dealing with the devaluation of money. So he deals with lawyers a lot.
Okay. All right. I was close. Let me say thank you to Bryce Jones for the $2.
Hey, Bryce.
Love y'all, what you guys do. Thank you so much. Super chats and all donations are super important for this channel. I know you guys want to watch this video again, and you can. It's going to be reposted over on Mormon Discussions channel. So make sure you are definitely subscribed to this one. We're not done yet. I'm not wrapping up. But please, I'm trying to get to 100,000 subscribers, you guys. So subscribe to this channel. And then what?
How many subscribers do you have?
52,000.
I hate you.
But you've been doing it a long time, and you are more prolific in your own way. But everyone, make sure you're a household name in ways I'm not.
If you are, okay, please, I think we need to have a race here, and we're way behind. This is like the tortoise and the hare. All right? So subscribe to Radio Free Mormon. Subscribe to Mormon Discussions, please. And let's see if we can't get to 100,000 before Kara Burrell.
It's linked down in the description. Please do. You and Bill completely deconverted my family more than anybody else. You are our saving grace.
You're doing amazing. You're very popular.
I've got a YouTubiness to me, and you guys have been podcasting for how long? When did you guys start podcasting, or at least you did?
October of 2016.
Yeah. You have a catalog of podcasts that have changed my family's life. So I don't care about the numbers. I care about my life has been changed. So
and I just care about the numbers.
Said the lawyer. Said the defense attorney.
He said patting his heart, or the place where his heart is supposed to be.
Said the lawyer. Yeah. Well, thank you guys for tuning into this. Make sure, yes, you do subscribe to them. They're down there. Mormon Discussions are amazing. And anything helps with donations. So we'll keep playing. All right, we're wrapping it up though. We've got a couple more. Let's see where else he goes in this one.
Of the testimony of witnesses and rational arguments can all help in convincing us that the church is true. The scriptures state that it is through repentance and obedience we can come to know God.
Ultimate back out.
Yeah.
Even though the scriptures say we can do that, we can always do this. Not the scriptures yet. We can do it by sharing information. We can do it by this. We can do, but the scriptures say this is how it's done, and you got to repent, and you got to do what the church says, and then you'll prove it to yourself how true the church is. By the way, had I mentioned that this entire line of argumentation effectively shifts the burden off the apologist and onto the person they're trying to convince. If the person doesn't get convinced, it's the person's fault. It's not the apologist's fault. It's not the Holy Ghost's fault. It's not God's fault. It's not anybody's fault except for the person that you're trying to convince, that if they don't get convinced by it, hey, it's your fault, man.
Isn't that fascinating? As well as where he says repent. And I really want to explain, that is insane to me. Like the idea of just generally Christian atonement theology, that there is a God who needs to have all of his other children pay for their sins. So he goes and beats and tortures and kills his favorite, only begotten son with half of his godly Elohim sperm in the body of a teenager like Mary, beats him. All of the sins of the world are put on that. And if you believe in that person and you repent for the things that are just pretty normative that you're going to do in your life, then that is how you know that God loves you. That's how you know it's true. That he did that for your older, the eldest brother. He did that for his only begotten son. And just by the mere fact that that's kind of a thing generally that's accepted in Christianity that happened.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't accept that, it's going to be a big problem for you. So repent of that, repent of your skepticism. And then as you repent of it and feel really guilty, just keep feeling like shit and repenting and give your tithing, do the ordinances, and then you'll be able to live with that really nice God again. Like, that's the proposition. I don't know why it's not selling.
Are you kidding? It's one of the 3 major world religions, or of the book anyway. I know there's a few others out there that aren't based on the Old Testament, but it's huge. And I
People
think that one of the reasons
fetishes.
is because it's so manipulative. The Christian theology, I think, is very manipulative, and it's manipulative in a number of ways, and it's not what we're talking about today. But let's start with this premise. You already talked about one of the ways. Another way is Jesus died for you. And what? You're not going to do anything to show your gratitude? He died for you. Are you not willing to like live for him? Yeah, it's quite manipulative.
Also, somebody said they weren't seeing the link to Radio Free Mormon's thing. If you go into my description of the YouTube video right now, it says @Mormon Discussions, and that's like a hyperlink. Just click on that and it'll take you there, but do it afterwards.
Yes, after we get it up over there.
Yeah.
Because they're having having a little ED problems getting it up over at Radio Free Mormon.
Okay. The draw achieved after avoiding the evidence. That's kind of what we're all been leading to.
To prove to us that he lives, that Jesus is the Christ, and that the church has been restored in the latter days. It is unusual to find an instance in which God himself appears to make his case. The primary way by which God proves his case is through the testimony of witnesses. For that reason, we should be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason for the hope that is in us. In fact, many modern translations of that verse use the word defense instead of answer, as the word in Greek is apologian and commonly refers to a verbal defense, particularly in a law court. In other words, Peter here calls on us to be apologists for our faith and to set out a defense of our beliefs.
Just quick add-in. He's asking you to defend your general knowledge of things that have been information that's been shared with you. He's going straight to defend it from the fact that you kind of know about it. Jump right into the defend it with your life. It's your eternal salvation, after all. You don't want to say that you spent your time twiddling your thumbs. Defend it. Yeah, that's healthy psychologically. I'm sure that's never led anyone down wrong paths. Go ahead.
And this is another place where he's going through and talking about the word and what it is in Greek and how it's translated and blah, blah, freaking blah. But I will tell you, can you go to 2235 and play it to 2343? I'll help you stop it. But
you want me to go back? 22?
Yeah, this is where he cites a person who's talking about religious proof. And he's endorsing what he has to say, but there's a huge problem with this. And it gets to the bottom of a lot of misunderstanding with regard to being able to prove things are true by means of witnesses.
Okay.
Yeah, see, that's it.
Simon Greenleaf was a Harvard law professor, and he bemoaned the fact that we hold religious propositions to a different standard and exclaimed, "All that Christianity asks of men on this subject is that they would be consistent with themselves, that they would treat its evidence as they treat the evidence of other things, that they would try and judge its actors and witnesses as they deal with their fellow men when testifying to human affairs and actions in human tribunals. Let the witnesses be compared with themselves, with each other, and with surrounding facts and circumstances, and let their testimony be sifted as if it were given in a court of justice on the side of the adverse party, the witness being subjected to a rigorous cross-examination. The result, it is believed, will be an undoubting conviction of their integrity, ability, and truth."
Okay,
it's helpful to note that in modern courtrooms, it is...
Yeah, that was the end of that quote. So here's a guy who I don't really know, Simon Greenleaf, a Harvard law professor, apparently, judging from the picture, of some time in the past, and talking about bemoaning the fact that we don't subject Christianity, I expect is what he would be promoting here, to the same type of evidence techniques that we use in a courtroom. So the thing is that Steve Densley is going to focus on how important witnesses are. He's not actually going to say what they witnessed, but we know, Joseph Smith saw this, he saw that, he saw some other damn thing. And we've got witnesses talking about the plate. So we've got witnesses, right? There are two words in this quote from Simon Greenleaf that undermine all of that. And here's the thing. The two words are cross-examination. Mm-hmm. When you have a witness in court, and this frequently is a surprise to clients, all right, or witnesses that my client may want to testify for them in court. A lot of times they say, well, I can't make it, or it's kind of uncomfortable. So can I just write out my testimony? Or they have this idea they can write it out, maybe sign it under penalty of perjury, whatever, and submit it, and that will satisfy the court. No, you can't do that. You cannot submit your testimony in writing for a trial unless it's agreed to by the other party. And there's a reason why. And the reason why is because of cross-examination. And we all know what cross-examination is because we see it, in TV, in movies. It's when the other side gets to ask questions. Cross-examination is considered to be one of the most important elements in figuring out what the truth is, which is why you can't just submit your testimony in writing. You have to show up because you have to testify to it, and then you have to submit yourself to cross-examination by the other party, who now gets to ask all the questions, which hopefully are going to get behind the things that you're trying not to say, or that show that your testimony is not as strong as you're trying to present it as being. So when you're dealing with any witness in a religious type of situation, whether it's Joseph Smith, whether it's Peter in the New Testament, whether it's Moses in the Old Testament, the problem is you can call them witnesses by looking at what they say, but none of that would ever be admissible in a court of law. And the reason is because they have to show up personally and be subject to cross-examination on their claims. That is why one of the constitutional rights that's in the Bill of Rights for a person who is on trial is the right of confrontation. They get to confront the witnesses against them so that they can cross-examine them. That's how critical this is to the whole process of trying to seek out truth in the justice system. And it's something that can never be done in a religious context. I suppose unless you're talking with someone who's alive, Denver Snuffer maybe, if he were to come in and he could submit himself to cross-examination on his religious claims, or if there's somebody else who's alive and could show up. Mm-hmm. But generally what the Warren Church does is anytime there's a lawsuit filed against the church, they do everything they can to keep the leaders of the church, the actual witnesses, the especial witnesses of the name of Jesus Christ. They try to do everything they can to keep them from taking the stand so that they cannot be subject to cross-examination.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Yeah, I'm really glad that you had me go back and play that clip. That's really well said, and exactly what I was trying to make the point a while ago of when he's comparing all these ideas about these things that are just apples and oranges, and we know that things work with like our rights as citizens and things, and it just doesn't really hold any water when you're trying to add those. It undermines his points a lot, where I'm like, I'm realizing I don't have any rights in this church that I would. There's no cross-examination. There's no way to get to the bottom of what these prophets are really complaining that they know. It's just,
there's a lot of analogies that can successfully be made between the legal system and trying to figure out what truth is in a religious sense. This is not one of them.
Exactly. Yeah, he's not helping his argument. Oh, and we have a Mormon in the chat, and a faithful Latter-day Saint. Should we post his question or his statement?
Sure.
Let's see. Shane, thanks for joining. He speaks through prophets. I hear him all the time, and he loves me and gave me this great opportunity of immortal life. If he actually came and spoke to you, you'd laugh and deny.
No, I wouldn't.
I don't think I would.
And these are all faith claims. There's no evidence here.
Yeah.
And I think that's great that if you believe he speaks through prophets, I used to believe that too. I still tend to believe that he does, although my definition of prophets would have changed and would have changed so as to include at least Shakespeare and Walt Whitman, Walt Whitman is a true prophet in my book. But Shane goes on, I hear him all the time. Okay. Are you saying you actually hear words all the time? You see, this is the thing. We use words in order to make things sound better or more spiritual than they really are. Because I don't really think Shane is saying, I hear him all the time. I hear these words all the time. I think what he's saying is he listens to the words of the prophets or reads the scriptures. And through that, he characterizes that as hearing him. You can correct me if I have this wrong, Shane. Maybe you do have this complete, what was it that James Joyce had? The stream of consciousness. Maybe you've got the the hook into God's stream of consciousness thoughts all the time. But I don't think that's what you mean. I hear him all the time, and he loves me. Okay, yeah. And that's another belief that you have. And gave me this great opportunity of immortal life. That's another faith claim. And you have a perfect right to have it. I'm glad you have it. That's exactly what I used to believe before I got knee deep into the evidence.
Yeah.
If he actually came and spoke to you, you'd laugh and deny. And I don't know why it is. I think it's very human, though, that a person feels that they want to say that to somebody else in order to show that you are so far gone. The light in your eyes is so gone. And there's nothing in your countenance anymore. But if he actually came and spoke to you, you'd laugh and deny. Why would I do that? Why would I do that? I remember having a discussion with Bill Reel. This is a number of years ago. And I've told this a couple of times. Where we're talking about Denver Snuffer. This is before I'd ever talked to him. Now we're friends. A super nice guy. And Bill's talking about Denver Snuffer as if he's a crackpot. And I'm sort of hedging on my response. And Bill's picking up on that and saying, well, what are you saying? You think he's sincere? And I said, well, yeah, I don't know. He seems sincere. So you're saying you think he's seen Jesus? And I said, I don't know if he's seen Jesus. I don't know if he's seen Jesus. Maybe he has. My experience would be the likelihood is low, but probably everybody would say that. But am I saying absolutely he never saw? How can I say that, Bill? And he says, so why don't you follow him if you think he could have seen Jesus? Said, Bill, here's the thing, okay? I am not going to say that Jesus did not appear to Denver Snuffer because that's beyond my ability to say. What I am going to say, though, is if Jesus wants to talk to me, he's got my address. He knows where I live. He can come and give a message to me. If he wants me to do something, don't be expecting me to follow somebody else who says they saw him. He can come and appear to me and give me his message. And if he did that, well, I'd probably sit up and listen. So if he actually came and spoke to me, no, I would not laugh, and I probably wouldn't deny either. It's just that it hasn't happened yet. And Shane, I'm guessing it hasn't happened to you either.
Well said. Other thing lovingly said, somebody said, they appreciated your gentleness when pointing this out. That reminds me of another thing that I didn't play in Steve's speech and clips. Do you remember the part where he talked about how we can't prove it? Jesus can't appear to every single person, for instance, because that would go against the rules of free agency. And as you know, Mormons, they love free agency. The war in heaven was fought over free agency. Lucifer does not want you to be free. He wants everyone just to follow the path. But Mormons, they love free agency. And to actually have convincing proof, if God were to actually put his best foot forward for this restoration, that would go against the principles of the restoration. Dang it. So we can't actually do that. So
that's what I got the first time I listened to it. When I listened to it several times later, I realized that what Steve Densley is doing is he's actually arguing differently than that. As I understand him, he's talking about the common trope that God could not prove his church true to the point that people could not deny it, right? Otherwise, that would take away their free agency. But then he goes to all these examples of people who have seen angels, who have seen divine miracles, and yet have fallen away or not been convinced by it. Layman and Lemuel would be a classic example, right?
Or the witnesses of the Book of Mormon he brings up,
Yes, that he does bring up. And so you have a situation where he's at least recognizing historically that it is not possible to overprove the case, for God to overprove the case that Mormonism and the Book of Mormon is true to the point where it would be undeniable to somebody, because they can deny stuff all the time, even if they've seen the angel with the plates and all this stuff. So having said that, he says, so that's not the reason God doesn't prove his case beyond a reasonable doubt. He admits that God could. Now, having admitted that God could and it not impact free agency, he doesn't talk about, then why doesn't God? Well, maybe he does. He substitutes a different reason. And he says why God doesn't prove his case beyond a reasonable doubt is because he's testing us and the desires of our heart. And the desires of our heart have to be to believe in him. And once again, if we have a desire of our heart to believe in him, then we can be convinced of the truth of the church by the apologist sharing information with us that makes us want to believe.
Exactly. Interesting. He makes so many different arguments as well. Then why don't we play maybe the last clip and then we'll wrap up?
Sure.
It's called Desire Controls.
Can you do this for me? I'm sorry,
Sure.
because I mentioned it earlier. Are you at 5420 or beyond that by now? Probably.
Let's see where we're at. This one is not playing.
I just like to watch the circle go around.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that one doesn't feel like playing. Let's see what this one.
Church may depend on large part.
We're at 57. We're at 5703.
Okay. If you can go to 5420 and play the 17 seconds after, this is where he actually says what it was that I had said before I even watched this. Remember, I was saying, this looks like another in a long line of talks that is designed to declare victory without ever dealing with the evidence. And actually, the victory that they end up wanting to declare is a draw. It's a draw. And he actually ends up saying that at 5420 to 5437. Let's see if we can hear it here.
Okay. It might be a little bit different because you were doing the time codes from the speech, right? From the written out speech?
No, then I went back and I watched it.
Oh, okay. Oh, good. Good.
Yeah, there were no time codes on the script.
Okay. I'm at 5408. Is that okay?
Yeah, and they'll lead up to 54.
Prove that the church is true. It raises a question regarding why it hasn't been done. In other words, why doesn't everyone believe? We might as easily ask the critics of the church, have you proven the church is not true? And
quick question. Have we proven the church is not true? I think so. You're muted.
And why is it the church is still around? He then says, I think.
A lot of people want to believe things. I'm not surprised.
Right. So what he's saying is his answer to if there's so much proof, why haven't you proven the church true? His response is, well, if there's so much evidence on the other side, why is the church still around? Why hasn't the church been proven not true? Why is it still around?
Because it talks like this, Steve.
Yes, exactly.
Bullshit like this.
This is the draw.
This conference.
He's willing to claim victory on. This is the draw, right? It's a tie.
What's that old quote about never play chess with a pigeon? It's like never argue with an idiot because they'll just, it's like playing chess with a pigeon. You know that one? Because they'll just like shit all over the board and declare victory.
I think I have now, and then knock all the pieces over.
Yeah.
And if so, why is the church still around? The question might not be one so much of belief as conviction, commitment, and loyalty.
There. It was that 117-second clip about where he's saying, I'm going for a draw. We've got a draw.
Yeah.
Because if you say, why can't you prove the church true? I'm saying, why can't you prove the church false? Well, guess what? Proof is still a subjective term. And apparently,
for all that.
Yeah, apparently the vast majority of people who have heard about Mormonism have not been convinced that it's true.
And what did he just say? It's more about conviction. It's more about like you got baptized and then you just continue to believe the things that your parents taught you, or that if you believed at one time, why don't you keep believing? That's a point that Jared Halverson, another apologist that I'm friends with, that I've responded to, he's made that point too. It's like, if you don't believe now, why did you believe before? And why did you say you could believe then? And why aren't those reasons good now? And I'm like, because I discovered more information. I grew up as a Santa Claus. I got critical thinking and I grew up. You wanted me, like you said, you want us to stay like kids or something? Like,
exactly. You used to believe in Santa Claus. You had reasons for believing in Santa Claus. It made you feel good to believe in Santa Claus. Why don't you believe in Santa Claus now?
You believed it at one point, so you keep believing it. That's literally the point apologists make over and over again. You believed it once, just stay convicted. That is the proof. I think it's interesting word choice that he does there. Yeah.
Right. And I don't know if it was Denzel Washington who said it, or if this is a quote that appears on a meme with Denzel Washington's picture and he never said it. They just put the meme together. But because I saw the meme with Denzel Washington's, and he's a pretty wise guy. I think he's a pretty smart guy. Has a lot of wisdom. I wouldn't be surprised if he said it. Now, having given it this big buildup, I hope I can remember what the hell the quote is. And the quote was this: A man, it could be a woman too, said, but a man who believes the same things at 40 that he believed at 20 has just wasted 20 years of his life. It's hard to deny that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we would hope that we would be learning and growing as human beings. If we stay the same, then what the hell are we doing? Nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this goes back to, like, again, where kind of my heart is at is in the faith crisis space, where people, the second half of their life, you know, the things that get us through the first half of life, and we're kind of building up our ego and our identity and what, you know, helps us find community in those things. And when it's not working, we get so shamed for actually asking questions and investigating and developing our own identity out of those things. And it's like, yes, those things they had a utility to them for the first half of my life till I was 30. But then are they true? No, they're not. And now I have a lot of, you know, untrue ideas bouncing around my noggin that we're going to have to get out of there and reintegrate the things that I do like from that first half of my life. But it's frustrating to be told that, you know, you're stupid for questioning the things that you were indoctrinated with since you were a child. I wouldn't look down on a Scientologist or a Jehovah's Witness for doing that, but Mormon apologists, they get to use that lane anytime that they want. They're like, if you believed it at one point, just stay with those convictions. Except for if we're trying to convert you to our church, then definitely question what you were raised to get to this one on the same mechanisms that are fraught. So
thank you for bringing that up, because that reminded me of the last major point I think that I wanted to make, is that this talk is a total wood tool.
Yes, I love wood tools.
This talk can be used by any church in order to show that any church can be proven true. Using the same principles, the Jehovah's Witnesses church can be proven true. Using the same principles, the Seventh-day Adventists can be proven true. It's a complete wood tool, which means that because it has universal applicability, it doesn't mean anything when applied to any church specifically.
Exactly. You're referencing my personal favorite podcast / article from Jonathan Streeter, Thoughts on Things and Stuff, about steel tools versus wood tools. Super helpful when I was deconstructing the Christianity part of my post-Mormonism, that if I wouldn't, you know, be okay with these types of answers that were given, these wood tools that kind of just placate somebody to stay believing. If you know somebody is in a false faith, you wouldn't use the same types of arguments. You would give them better critical thinking skills of things like, do investigate all that you can, read information in and outside of the church, see what critics of this religion have to say, draw your own conclusions, as opposed to things that work for any false faith that would keep somebody trapped in a false faith. Those are the wood tools. Those are the, you know, we won't know until after we die. God is mysterious. Like, keep going with what you believe. We'll find out in the afterlife. If you were convicted at one point, just keep going with that. That keeps anybody trapped in a false faith. And so it's what every kind of high demand religion or non-high demand religion kind of uses to keep people placated. But it's not, the reason they're called wood tools versus steel tools, if the analogy for the audience is not obvious, it's just, you can't cut down to the truth of the matter with a wood tool. You need a steel tool to actually, this is your life, take control of it and use the proper tools to investigate, instead of just hammering away with child's toys.
Yeah, and I do wonder, I mean, I know Steve Densley, he's a smart guy, he's accomplished a lot. And to give him the benefit of the doubt of being smart, I wonder if being smart, he recognized that this talk is one huge 60-minute wood tool. And that's why he labored to obscure the message as much as he seems to have, because when you break it down and see what he's saying, it's just a wood tool that could apply to any church.
And again, the reason why I like this talk, because Fair Mormon, they'll have these conferences and they will talk about every different apologetic angle of, you know, different aspects of, oh, they think that the Book of Mormon can be proven false with anachronisms. And here we have some expert from the Mormon church who's going to tell us why that's not a problem at all. You know, they'll go through these things. But I really like about this, like, to bring this all together, is this is the framework. This is the wood tool framework of high demand religions, of cults, of the Mormon church, that they bring somebody in who has type of stature out there in the real world as an attorney or whatever, and they bring in his kind of like credentials and the way his brain works, and then he uses them, again, like we said, to bastardize, to help this. And it's just an interesting peek into how high demand religions kind of function and what their frameworks are, when we're not talking about like, the nitty gritty of the different truth claims and the historical record and stuff. This is the framework, and we're just exposing that it's a bullshit framework. It just is. It's not helpful. It's obvious. We can see right through it. I have no lawyerly training, and I'm like, this is not leading anyone to truth. This is gish galloping a bunch of random things to make it look smart. And if people want to still believe, they're still going to believe and say that was a great talk, but it's not going to convince.
And if they said that, I would say, can you explain to me what he said?
Yeah, just it literally they'd have to be like, proof doesn't really mean proof. I know it's proven true to me, and then abscond and sneak out the back door. Like,
there's an old saying about God and proving his existence, which I think is pretty insightful. And it says, sometimes people act as if the nicest thing you can say about God is that some scientist somewhere believes in him. Right? So you got some scientist who believes in God. That's the best thing you can say about God, because Jesus is a scientist and he believes in God. In the same way, I think that what they're doing here is they're using Steve Densley's attorney status to say, look, we've got an attorney who believes the evidence supports the case. So even though he's not going to talk about any of the evidence, we can just rest assured that he's an expert witness. And if it's enough to convince him, then it must be enough to convince me.
Mm-hmm. That's totally part of what the pillars were in my testimony. I don't know about you, audience, but I always pointed to certain people. I'm like, I don't need to look at any of the, conflicting things that might be problematic to my testimony. I never looked at anything before I was 30 years old, even though I knew there'd be stuff that was probably out there. I didn't know anything about the stuff you'd find in the CS letter, because I seriously told myself, I know a lot of professors, I know a lot of smart people who, if they believe it, then what could the problem be?
Yes.
Like, I don't need to go rocking my boat and stuff. But if you just look back to even Talmage, who's, there's plenty of scientists and people who have been within the church, and they say that they respect evidence and stuff. But even people like Talmage back in the day during the 20 secret meetings with B.H. Roberts and stuff. If you remember what he wrote down in his journal that night, that like crushed my testimony, where he said that we were presented with some evidence that there were no horses on the American continent, apparently, like the Book of Mormon says they are. And he writes down and he's like, well, the Book of Mormon says that there was horses on the American continent, so therefore there were horses on the American continent. Case closed. He's just like every other person who could be a scientist out there in the real world for their profession or whatever. When it comes to faith claims, if they have a stake in the church, they will put that off to the side and say, whatever the church is, we're going with that as the truth. Book of Mormon says it, it's true.
And if you want to bring that in a complete circle back to the first slide featuring Daniel C. Peterson, that's exactly the same thought process that James Talmage was going through, which is, I am starting with the conclusion that the church in the Book of Mormon is a historical and accurate record of what happened on the American continent thousands of years ago. And therefore, regardless of what science says, if the Book of Mormon says there were horses, then the science is wrong.
And just like Carrie Molstein, we're just going back and forth. Carrie Molstein, Egyptologist that nobody respects, but still, when he's giving speeches at Fair Mormon, he'll say that I start off with the assumption that the Book of Mormon and the restored gospel and anything that we get from it is true. And then anything else that I learn, I fit it within that paradigm.
Yes.
They've fully taken the mask off. That's what they're doing. He's going to fit it within the paradigm of what, like Steve Densley is saying, you already know it's true because of you've been convicted. You were baptized. You were told to believe this. Continue believing it. Fit anything else that you think into that. And it's just this logical fallacy to me of like, I don't have a good case, but I will go out searching for things that will fit into the case that I already have that's not very good.
Mm-hmm.
So cool.
Sometimes
nice. Have fun with that.
Sometimes it's called a theory in search of evidence.
Theory in search of evidence. Well, and I don't think we quite roasted him enough on his try to like take down of science, because I kind of skipped that one. But Rod Meldrum and my Mormon Stories interview with John, and when you get into these
Let's
spaces,
talk about Rod Meldrum. Let's see if we can trigger you again.
I love Rob. I wish I could do nothing but talk about the traditional faction of the Mormon Church. But anyone who really, they have these lines of arguments where it's like, well, Big Bang said it came from nothing. And if you're going to trust like Richard Dawkins, you're going to trust this guy. And it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what the word theory means, first of all. But that science is actually quite a humble thing, to be honest. They call things theories, and they want to have things be proven or disproven by other scientists. Like, I think science gets a bad rap by a lot of religious people, thinking that it's like the most provable thing. And I'm like, it's a method. It's a methodology. It's a way of going about to discover truth, as opposed to your religious convictions that you stick with no matter what. It's a discovery of truth. It's actually quite a humble pursuit. You might want to learn something from that.
It can be. It's supposed to be a humble pursuit for truth. Unfortunately,
until Big Pharma gets involved, and then I have no faith in it anymore.
But of course, because science is a search for truth, and because science, their knowledge is always tentative, their understanding is always defined in terms of likelihoods and never concrete certainty. It's changing because as new evidence comes in, it changes to conform to the evidence in the best way that it's supposed to work. Now, religion will take that fact and say, well, religion is always the same. Even Mormons say that, believe it or not. The church has changed more in 200 years than like anything else has in one, or 1,000, I should say. But the Mormon church has changed so much, says religion stays the same, but science changes. And therefore, any place that science contradicts my religion is simply where it hasn't changed enough to corroborate it. And in time, science will change and figure out that my religious beliefs were right all along.
Exactly, man. Go science. All right. Should I skip to the end? To the desire controls clip?
Yeah, sure.
We're at 2 hours and 6 minutes.
The desire to believe. Can you just play 57:12 through 59:51?
Yes, sir.
This is where he finally says it and says the desire to believe is all. If you can pack that jury with 12 people who desire to believe, you have a chance of winning the case of proving the Book of Mormon is true. That's really what he says.
Okay. Rant for a second more because I got to find it. It's not pulling up now, man.
Oh.
Look at this. It's going blank.
Uh-oh.
Satan is in the Google Slides.
I think Shane found a back door to come in.
Church may depend on...
You said about the 57 mark?
57:12 to 59:51.
On whether we hope the church is true. As Moroni asked, how is it that you can attain faith, save you shall have hope? If we do not want the church to be true, we will look for reasons to support our desires and justify our unbelief. So one way to reach people would be to help them see how beautiful and desirable the truths taught in the church are, that the gospel really is good news. That can help them to develop the desire to believe. It often seems as though someone...
By your fruits you shall know them. I just got to added my own little snarky thing. I had a really hard time after I left the church, and my parents I was dead to them based on that sole fact. I didn't do anything differently. I just was a mom who had a newborn baby, didn't have a lot of sleep. And I really dislike any ideas where people are trying to either convince you the church is true because of the fruits, or that people who aren't in the church, that their fruits are bad. And then they will look for some kind of confirmatory evidence, like, oh, my daughter's not Mormon anymore, and she's really tired and grouchy, ignoring the fact that the fruits of her living out Mormonism and having more babies than she probably should have had is that she's a little bit grouchy, And so I really dislike anything where people are like, just convince people that the church is true based on the fruits, and that the church is true because people who don't live it look at their fruits. It's disgusting. It's not nice. It's not Christian and stuff. And if you want to talk about like the fruits of Mormonism, you're going to have to look at Warren Jeffs and all of the different polygamous cults that are just carbon copies of what Joseph Smith was living in and of itself. The fruits of Mormonism are not quite unique. There's nice people. There's people bringing you casseroles everywhere. There's structure in lots of different places. But the fruits of Mormonism are not something that's going to convince a lot of people when you're like, well, this is the one true church. Look around at all of the beauty and progress of the church trying to take away gay marriage from California or whatever. I'm like, that's just when people live in a small little box like this, they think all the fruits are so amazing and it's just an echo chamber. But get outside of that box and the fruits are not going to be that convincing. If you're trying to prove the church is true, got a history that's a problem, and then the fruits in of themselves. I could spend about 25 hours talking about how disappointed people who try to live it to the best of their ability. They just came up short on what those fruits were. Just got to tell you that. Anyway.
Yeah. And fruits is interesting because I do hear that kind of argument around there about the fruits of Mormonism or the fruits of the members, leaving to the side the fact that I think the scriptural reference to that has to do not with the fruits of the members, but with the prophets. It's talking about
so true.
By their fruits you shall know them.
Yeah. Going back to Jesus Christ saying, people saying, how do I know who to follow? You're talking about that in the New Testament?
Yeah, I think, is it the Sermon on the Mount? I think so. It's in there somewhere.
Yeah. Because I always get really interested in that because apologists will say, there's an apologist that I responded to once where he said that, did Joseph Smith do anything that would disqualify him as a prophet? Again, totally lowering the bar, but for the guy who's going to be like the person standing next to Jesus Christ, who you have to get an okay from to get into heaven. And it's like, did he do anything that disqualifies him from being a prophet? It's like, maybe. Anyway, but yeah, that's so funny because when Mormons want to point to like the fruits, Jesus was talking about the prophets in and of themselves, and you follow like what came out of Joseph Smith's teachings, you follow what came out of Brigham Young. It's not a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, so I did look it up. It is Matthew 7, and it's beware of false prophets, which come to you, by the way, which would be the back of the Sermon on the Mount, it being 5, 6, and 7 in the Gospel of Matthew. Just want to point that out. False prophets comes to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they're ravening wolves. Ye shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? That's all about prophets. Knowing a false prophet from a prophet. It's a funny question, though. Did Joseph Smith ever do anything that would disqualify him as a prophet? Well, that depends on what you think would disqualify him as a prophet. Because if you're a believer, the answer is no. There's nothing that Joseph Smith could have done, no matter how heinous, that would disqualify him as a prophet. On the other hand, if you're a staunch disbeliever, then there's nothing that Joseph Smith could have done, no matter how good or insightful or positive, that would justify any kind of praise to him.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Joseph Smith was like everybody else. I think he lived his life in crescendo. I think he had much bigger, higher highs and lower lows, however you want to define that, morally or whatever, than most people. But he was a mixture of good and bad, just like anyone else, I think. I don't think there's anybody who's all bad and anybody who's all good. That prophet I talked about, Walt Whitman, one of my favorite quotes from him is, I am the worst man I know, but thank God I am also the best.
That's beautiful, actually. I'm kind of hard on myself. I think we all know ourselves a little bit too much, and we know our strengths and our weaknesses to a intense degree. I like that.
And there are those of us, and I think I'm similar, and I think a lot of people are similar, but not everybody, who's very, very, it's like you go to high school and you got the zit on your nose, right? And you're worried that everybody's going to be looking at the zit on your nose when you don't give a crap about all the acne that everybody else has, right? Mm-hmm. It's just you, and you're the one who's going to be the focus of this scorn and this shame and this mockery. Mm-hmm. That's me. Yeah. So I'm very hard on myself. I am harder on myself than I am on anybody else by a huge degree. And yet there are people who are the opposite, who are harder on everybody else than they are on themselves. And so those kind of people, they have a character flaw just in a different way, but their character flaw allows them to not see anything wrong, to not be as limited by conscience in what they do. And I think that was part of the character of Joseph Smith.
Mm-hmm. So a narcissist, in other words.
I know the term gets thrown around a lot. calling a lot of different people narcissists is particularly offensive to people like me who really are a narcissist.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
this is a high level status that you only get to with a lot of work and a lot of effort. So calling everybody else a narcissist, kind of an insult. But I do think that, yeah, he was very egotistic. I think he was very egotistical, and whether he was born that way or he became that way through events in his life, I think that he felt that he was the bomb.
Yeah.
And that anybody who disagreed with him, it was their fault. Everything is everybody else's fault. Nothing's my fault. And I think it's because of that he put himself in a position where he ended up trampling all over pretty much everybody.
Yeah. Losing everybody right on. Yeah.
The most important thing that happened to the growth of Mormonism was Joseph Smith's death. I think that he died at probably the best possible time that he could have. And if he had continued to live very much longer beyond 38 and a half years old, I think it was, I think that Mormonism would have disassembled of its own weight. It would have collapsed because of him. But his dying when he did, his being murdered when he did, and that being used as a catalyst for his followers and the strength of Joseph Smith. Were you looking at your watch while I was talking?
I got a notification just real quick. Yeah,
I meant the strength of Brigham Young. I was looking at your watch. The strength of Brigham Young and his power as a leader ended up making Mormonism so that it survived. And then it got out to Utah, and then it thrived. And now it's got over $150 billion in the bank. It's an American success story.
I like the crescendo towards the end of his life. It was a whole orchestra of a lot of different things. And then it needed, like, I don't know, some type of acid rock, iron fist, metal type of dude like Brigham Young to take it over from all the different theological, melodic combinations of Joseph Smith. But it needed to come to an end. Or else I would just say, like, that he would have kept doing so many things like a spiritual narcissist would keep doing when you think that you talk for God and no one can prove you wrong, and the church was constantly falling apart with people being excommunicated and kicked out. Or, if you don't follow me, you're out of here. So how much longer could that have gone on for? So
I think
ended the way you would expect.
I think a lot of times religious movements that succeed, and that's by far the minority of religious movements that actually succeed, start with a charismatic individual, and then they're followed up by a very strong individual.
Totally.
So Joseph Smith had his Brigham Young. Charles Taze Russell had his Rutherford. Can't remember Rutherford's first name. And most obviously, Jesus had his Paul. Without Paul, Christianity would be a footnote in Jewish history.
Totally.
So those, I think, have expended all my thoughts on the subject.
Me too. Okay, should we finish up this quote?
Yes.
We went on a 25-minute tangent on the fruits of the convictions. Okay. I'll rewind it just a hair so that we know where we're at.
Spirit does not operate in a vacuum. It does not seem possible that one could be converted by the Spirit without having been given reasons to believe. At the very least, evidence provides a reason for seeking spiritual confirmation and a reason to continue seeking spiritual strength after once receiving a witness of the Holy Ghost. Of course, evidence does not need to be in the form of a logical argument or even an appeal to the authority of the Scriptures. As demonstrated above, proof may come through a variety of means, including simply that a person becomes converted through the experience of living the gospel, such as learning that through fellowship with the saints, good things are brought to pass. And once one has been given reasons to believe, the Spirit can confirm the truth of the...
Did you ever do that when you were a kid?
No, it was out of style by the time I was in the 90s, I think.
I think so. I haven't done it in 50 years, but at that point,
it was more like,
I felt like...
Dad me with a spoon.
Yeah, that's gibberish.
Yep. All right. Anything else you want me to play? Anything else you want to say?
I think that's it. I think that covers it. We're already at over 2 hours. And that's after getting a late start.
Thanks, everyone. We have 262 people in the live stream right now.
God bless each one of them.
Yeah. Any other final thoughts you want to wrap up with? Have you had your closing remarks?
I think I've closed several times in the course of this, like Moroni writing his final words on the gold plates. But it's been great being with you. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm glad that we finally worked it out. It has been time and time and time again. We pushed this out, but all things work together for our good. Eventually, this entire talk went up on YouTube. So I think this was the time to do it.
That's perfect. So if anyone wants to give us any other comments, faithful, ex-Mormon, never Mormons, people who are fans of logic, I would love to read the comments down below. For anyone who's watching this live stream back, and anything else that we missed that you want to add to this. So RFM, thank you so much for doing this with me. People can find you over at Mormon Discussions. They can find you on all the podcasting apps under Mormon Discussions. If they type in Radio Free Mormon, they can go listen to your catalog of amazing episodes. The one that made my husband press play was called Why Are Mormons So Fake? So start there if you want a good one to start with. That was the one that my husband said, if I listen to this, I'm probably leaving the church, and here we are today. So
because he kind of already recognized that on some level.
He said, I want to hear why Mormons are so fake, and you made some great arguments, as you do. So you've been killing it on all of your presentations and commentary for years. So we've been friends for a while. I've been doing collabs with Bill, so it's good you and me finally did our first collab.
I'm glad. I'm just sorry we're not in the hot tub together.
Why?
Because that's Bill's? You and Bill.
I've never been in the hot tub with Bill.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was I not supposed to mention that?
I've been waiting. No, I visited Bill at his house, though.
I thought this one you did live with Bill, several months ago, was
never.
You were in the hot tub in his backyard.
No, we were outside of it. But
the hot tub was there.
Yeah.
There's just weren't in the hot tub.
You caught me off guard because there's so many accusations of like me and John DeLynn or something. And I'm like, these are just my male friends who I look up to.
I know it's not just John anymore. She's expanding out her network to Bill.
Yeah. Imagine I needed any other casting couch help in this space, but I don't. So
it's like the hot tub club.
Yeah. So should I plug my last few things, or should I let you go?
Yes, please do. Are you going to let me go?
Do you want me to let you go? I can let you go.
If you let me go, I'll be happy to be let gone. I've been needed to be let gone for a while, but that would be super. And you can go ahead and plug this wonderful experience that you're going to be having this summer with one or more lucky members of your listeners.
All right. That's what I'm going to do. And thank you guys for tuning in. Go follow RFM, and appreciate you for bringing all your knowledge to this. And
thanks so much, Carrie. I appreciate it.
But all right. Love you, dude.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye. Yo, guys. This is so exciting to finally have my collab with RFM. I've had so much fun working in the sex Mormon space. I started a 501c3 nonprofit a while ago, and I want to be able to do big, cool things, do community building. And part of that, so you guys know, is I have a trip to Greece that I am doing in August 26th through September 1st. So I know if it's out of your budget, it's fine. It is just the price of what a trip to Greece would honestly cost. And so I worked really, really hard on this itinerary. The company that I'm working with is amazing. So there is a link down below that you can go check out the itinerary. I know that I'm covering the screen a little bit too much right now. There we go. So travel with me to Greece and taking a group trip. Everybody's welcome. Ex-Mormons, never Mormons, anyone over 18, couples, singles. I have a bunch of people signed up right now. I have 24 spots to fill though. And the deadline to sign up is about June 20th. So please check out that link. The itinerary is going to be so fun. We're spending 7 days in Athens and Santorini in a beach resort there. Most of the food is included. We're going to have some boating excursions through the Mediterranean, and just a good opportunity to actually do something off the screens and make friends and have fun, make new lifelong travel companions with me. So if that sounds really fun and interesting, please sign up. There's payment plans available. I'm just trying to pack this trip with as many fun people who want to go travel around Greece with me as possible. That's August 26th through September 1st. So any other questions, leave them down below. Thank you guys again for sticking with this Steve Densley talk. It was dense, but it was also like, are you dense at the same time? So couldn't do this without the support of my nonprofit and the donors. So if you are a donor, thank you so much. If you want to become one, the donor box is the place to leave a one-time or recurring donation. So just like Mormon Discussions with Bill Reel and RFM, and John DeLynn with Mormon Stories and the OSF, where I used to work, they're also nonprofits where their podcast wouldn't really make a lot of money on its own, and to be able to make things sustainable, they both also have nonprofits and encourage me to start my own so that I can be making this kind of content for years to come, doing community building and just do something female-led in this space. So if you want to support it, it's tax deductible in the United States, donor box down below. I also have a Venmo at Cara B. All these podcasts as the Mormon History Hoedown, they're all available on wherever you get your podcasts under the Mormon History Hoedown. And that's what I'm going to be doing for a while. I'm taking off the summer to go work at a summer camp, and then when I come back, we're going to Greece. So I'm just wrapping up this season. If you want to contact me, if you have any other suggestions, if you want to be interviewed on my podcast, if you want to be a guest, if you want to say thanks, Cara, you're doing a great job, my email is also down below in the description. So please subscribe. I'm trying to get to 100,000 subscribers. Would love a plaque. Would love to, like I said, just keep doing this forever. So love to read your comments. Make sure you're liking this video. Thank you again, everyone in the live stream. You guys are amazing. Thanks for showing up on a Saturday morning. All right, that's it for me for this episode. Love you so much.